Take a breath, slow down, and let your eyes adjust, because tonight we're going somewhere the daylight never reaches. A place that once sat beneath castles, courts, bustling markets, and quiet chapel bells, yet almost no one ever saw it willingly. You're about to step into a medieval dungeon. Not the ones you see in films, neatly lit with torches and dramatic shadows, but the real ones, the cramped, damp, suffocating spaces beneath stone floors and fortress walls. The kind of places where time didn't pass normally, where hours blurred into days and days blurred into fear. But before we walk down those steps, let's pause for a moment at the entrance. Feel the cold air drifting upward. Hear the faint dripping of water echoing from somewhere far below. Notice how even the ground above seems to hesitate, as if the castle itself doesn't want to remember what's hidden underneath. Most people think of dungeons as places designed for punishment, but the truth is stranger and heavier. These underground chambers weren't just prisons. They were tools. Tools of control, tools of intimidation, tools that symbolized absolute authority in an age where the law was often a matter of who held the largest sword or the most influence. And the people sent inside? Well, they rarely matched the dramatic stories. Some were criminals by definition, others just annoyed the wrong noble. Some were waiting for trial, others for ransom, and a few simply had the misfortune of being in the way. But all of them, no matter their story, faced the same reality once the door shut. No light, no warmth, no comfort, and no certainty. Tonight, you'll learn exactly why you wouldn't survive even a single night down there. Not because you're weak, far from it, but because medieval dungeons were built for a kind of endurance no regular person should ever have. They weren't designed to hold the body, they were designed to break the mind. You'll hear the scrape of iron hinges, the shuffle of straw, the hollow silence of a space carved entirely for confinement. You'll see how prisoners lived, how guards operated, and what really happened in those hidden corridors beneath the world above. And as we walk deeper in, slowly, carefully, you'll discover the strange truth behind these places, that the dungeon wasn't just a room. It was a warning, a message carved into the stone itself. So take one more breath. This is your last moment in the open air for a while. The torchlight flickers. The steps descend. The darkness waits. The first thing you notice when you enter a medieval dungeon isn't the darkness, it's the air. It hangs thick and heavy, almost tangible, carrying the scent of damp stone, stale water, and the faint metallic tang of iron. You breathe it in, and it feels like swallowing a shadow. Each inhale leaves a chill in your chest, and the air is so still that the smallest movement, a drip of water from the ceiling, a scurry of rat feet across the floor, sounds like a clap of thunder. The entrance is narrow, carved from stone that has known the touch of thousands before you. The doors are massive, bound with iron and reinforced with thick wooden beams. When the guards lock it behind you, the sound reverberates in the corridor like a cannon. The echo settles in your stomach and refuses to leave. You step forward, your boots clattering softly against uneven cobblestones. Your eyes adjust slowly, revealing the first things the dungeon wants you to notice. The walls, slick with moisture, The rough-hewn cells that line the corridor like rows of open mouths, the iron rings bolted into stone, abandoned chains swaying gently in the draft. Every detail whispers of confinement, of forgotten people, of long nights that stretched without end. No one welcomes you. There's no guide, no soft words, no instructions. The dungeon is indifferent. It exists outside the rules of comfort, beyond the reach of sunlight, and far from mercy. Your first step is hesitation. Every instinct tells you to turn back, but the doors are closed now, and the only way out is forward. You pass a cell where a tattered blanket lies in a heap, damp and stiff with age. You glance at the walls, and faint marks scratch their way upward, desperate etchings of someone who lived here before you, or tried to. You realize quickly that this place is designed not for living, but for survival in its most basic sense. The stone underfoot is cold enough to bite through shoes. The walls feel like they might close in, even though they remain unmoving. Sound carries strangely here. Every footstep, cough, and whispered thought amplified in the empty corridors. A flickering torch casts long, dancing shadows. One moment, a cell appears empty. The next, it seems as if someone is crouched inside, waiting. You know it's imagination, but the mind is cruel in the dark. The dungeon forces you to confront it. You hear the drip of water again, slower now, measured. You step carefully, each motion deliberate, because slipping here isn't just inconvenient, it could be fatal. The floors are uneven, and a misstep could leave you sprawled, vulnerable on cold stone. And then you notice the smell beneath the dampness. Unwashed bodies, the sharp tang of iron from old weapons, and something more elusive, fear that has settled into the walls, absorbed into the mortar over centuries. You realize this dungeon has its own memory, one that doesn't forgive or forget. It just remembers. You approach a cell door. Iron bars, rusted but unyielding, gape open before you. Inside, a simple cot, scratched with initials, sits against the back wall. The air inside is thicker, almost suffocating. You imagine the night spent here, long and unbroken. Hunger gnawing at the stomach, cold gnawing at the bones. Time stretching into an unending moment. You crouch to touch the floor. Moisture seeps through your fingertips. The stone is uneven, sharp, unkind. You can imagine the countless prisoners who have crouched here before, shivering, trying to sleep, praying for something that never came. You step back, shivering despite yourself. The dungeon has made its first point. This is not a place of comfort. This is a place of endurance. As you move deeper into the corridors, you hear more than just the dripping water. A scurrying rat here, the faint scratching of claws there. Occasionally, the wind finds its way through the cracks and howls like a ghost through the stone. You start to understand that this dungeon isn't merely a space. It's a character. It is ancient, cruel, and aware of every step you take. Cells branch off in narrow passageways. Some are completely dark, as though swallowed by the dungeon itself. Others carry faint traces of previous occupants, a shoe here, a piece of rope there. The dungeon keeps no inventory, and yet it remembers everything. You think about the people who came here before, captured thieves, accused witches, failed nobles, anyone who dared cross the wrong person. Some left behind scraps of cloth, some scratched prayers into the stone. Most left nothing at all. Time here is measured differently, and survival isn't guaranteed. The deeper you go, the colder it becomes. Not just physically, but mentally. Even your thoughts start to feel heavy, burdened by the weight of the stone, the darkness, and the unrelenting silence. You notice that shadows seem to cling to you, stretching as if they were alive. You tell yourself it's a trick of the torchlight, but deep down, you know the dungeon has ways of making even your mind feel trapped. You come to a central chamber, larger than the corridors, where chains hang from hooks in the walls. Rusted shackles dangle as if waiting for a hand to fill them. The floor is uneven, scarred, wet in places, and you realize this chamber has been used for punishment, not just confinement. Every scratch, every stain, tells a story of someone who came in expecting to survive and did not. You can almost hear them, the whispers of prisoners long gone, the sighs and curses of those who knew they would never see the sun again. The dungeon doesn't allow pity. It allows observation. It allows endurance. It allows nothing else. You find a small alcove with a wooden bench. Sitting down, you let your back rest against the cold stone. For a moment, you close your eyes. You hear the water drip, the wind whistle, the distant scurrying of rats. You imagine a candle burning somewhere in a distant corridor. You imagine warmth, food, light, all the things that exist outside these walls. And then reality returns. Hunger gnaws. Cold seeps in. Your mind races with scenarios. How would you survive here? How long could you endure the nights, the constant dampness, the gnawing anxiety? The dungeon does not care about these questions. It only waits. Hours seem to pass, or minutes. Time is meaningless here. You shift on the bench, trying to stay warm. You hear a noise, perhaps a rat, perhaps nothing, and it makes your heart leap. You begin to understand what the dungeon teaches above all else: vigilance. Even the smallest lapse could mean injury, disease, or worse. You rise to leave the alcove, moving carefully through the twisting corridors. Every step is deliberate, every sound amplified. The dungeon stretches endlessly. The cells multiply, the darkness deepens, and the air grows colder. You think about the people who have been here for weeks, months, even years. They are gone, or they are part of the dungeon now. A shadow moves just beyond the torchlight. Your breath catches. But it is only a rat, scurrying along the walls. Yet even this small encounter leaves you jumpy, aware of the constant threats. In this place, danger is everywhere, and safety is an illusion. You stop in front of a door with iron bars that seems different from the others. It is larger, reinforced, older. Something about it makes the hair on the back of your neck rise. You imagine the prisoner who once occupied this cell, the punishments endured, the nights spent in solitude. You run your hand over the bars. The metal is cold, slick with moisture. You imagine the skin of someone pressed against it, the handprints left behind, the hope and despair etched into every inch. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down on you, and it becomes clear. The dungeon does not forget. It never forgives. And it certainly never offers mercy. You turn and make your way back toward the entrance, your footsteps echoing, your heart still racing. The torchlight flickers, casting shadows that seem almost alive. You realize that the dungeon has changed you already, made you smaller, quieter, more aware of every sound and smell. It has forced your mind to imagine worst-case scenarios at every turn. When you finally reach the heavy doors at the entrance, you hesitate. Outside, the city is bright, noisy, alive. The contrast is shocking. You step into the sunlight, the air warm against your chilled skin. You breathe deeply, tasting freedom in a way that feels almost sacred. And yet, part of you knows, you will never truly leave. The dungeon has claimed a piece of you, as it claimed pieces of everyone who has ever entered. Its lessons linger in your mind, in the way you notice shadows, in the way you move through spaces, in the quiet voice of caution that now speaks with every step. You survived this first encounter, but the dungeon is patient, and its tests have only begun. Because to last here, even for a day, you would need more than courage. You would need endurance, cunning, and the ability to endure what most minds would break under. And deep down, you know, you wouldn't. Hunger is a companion you can never shake in a medieval dungeon. It begins small, almost like a whisper at the edge of your awareness. At first, you notice it in the quiet ache of your stomach, a dull gnaw that can be ignored for a few hours. But the dungeon does not allow ignorance for long. Hunger grows steadily, relentlessly, until it fills your mind, your body, and even the corners of your imagination. You try to distract yourself at first. You pace the cell, examine the stone walls, count the scratches and markings left by those who came before you. You think of warm bread, of soup, of roasted meat. You imagine your favorite meal, the taste still vivid in memory. And then reality intrudes. You are trapped, alone, with only stale air, damp stone, and the faintest smell of rot. The first night, it is manageable. You can sleep in fits, waking occasionally to a pang that gnaws at your ribs. You tell yourself you are strong, that this is only a beginning, and that one night will not break you. But by the second day, hunger begins to change. It is no longer a simple ache. It twists into desperation, gnawing at your resolve, clawing at your concentration. You notice that every sound in the dungeon becomes sharper, every movement faster, every shadow more threatening. Hunger sharpens the senses, but it also erodes the mind. The dungeon is cruel in how it metes out food. There is none for you now, none unless you are deemed worthy, and worthiness is not measured by need, but by whim and cruelty. You can hear the distant footsteps of guards delivering scraps to favored prisoners, or to those whose crimes or social rank demand some semblance of sustenance. You are not among them. You find yourself imagining what you would eat if you could. Bread, dry and hard, soaked in water. Occasionally, a piece of salted meat, tough and stringy. A turnip or a carrot, if luck allowed. The things are nothing on their own, but in a dungeon, they are treasure. The problem is that such treasures are rare. Weeks could pass without a proper meal. Even when food appears, it is barely enough to sustain life. The hunger gnaws not only at your body, but at your mind. You imagine the warmth of a hearth, the soft murmur of a family dinner. You dream of grabbing a loaf of bread from a baker's cart, and the fantasy is so vivid that you taste it in your mouth. And then reality hits. The cold stone under your hands, the iron bars around you, the emptiness of your stomach. Rats, the dungeon's silent companions, are a cruel reminder that hunger is universal here. They move quickly, skittering along the walls, noses twitching, eyes gleaming. Some prisoners attempt to catch them. A flash of desperation drives them to hurl a piece of cloth or a shoe to snare the creatures, thinking they might provide a meal. Rarely does it succeed, and when it does, the effort often leaves the prisoner weaker than before, too tired to enjoy what little reward they earned. The longer you go without sustenance, the stranger your body feels. Limbs ache, head spins, thoughts loop endlessly, focused on one goal, food. You notice how your sense of taste begins to exaggerate memories of meals. How water, mere water, begins to taste like wine. How you begin to count every drop you drink as though it were gold. Sanitation is almost non-existent. Water is scarce and often contaminated. Even when you find it, it carries a metallic taste and a faint odor of damp stone. Drink too little and your body suffers. Drink too much and the risk of sickness increases. The dungeon does not reward moderation, and the margin for error is impossibly thin. You see it happen to others, even if only in fragments. Prisoners bent and twisted from malnutrition, their limbs thin as sticks, their eyes hollow, their strength gone. And then there are those whose minds begin to fray first. Hallucinations, whispering to themselves, staring into walls, counting the drops of water from a slow leak as though they were steps to escape. Hunger steals body and mind with equal efficiency. The guards are indifferent to suffering. If you cry out, they might mock you, or worse, punish you for what they see as weakness. They have seen hunger strip countless prisoners of dignity. They know that leaving you alone is often more effective than interference. The mind begins to unravel without the need for hands to tighten chains. And yet, within this suffering, there is a rhythm. Prisoners learn to ration their meager rations, to nibble at a stale crust slowly, to sip water in minute amounts. They learn to lie still when the pangs are strongest, to sleep in short bursts to conserve energy. The dungeon teaches you patience, even as it drains you of everything else. By the third week, your perception of food changes entirely. You can no longer think of meals as something pleasant or sustaining. They are survival, nothing more. Bread becomes a prize, water a necessity, and anything beyond that, meat, fruit, even milk, is a dream you cannot touch. Your body begins to shrink to its essentials, conserving energy in ways you cannot fully control. Hunger teaches you to observe. Every shadow becomes potential food, every rat a threat or an opportunity. You notice the sounds of distant kitchens, the clatter of pots in a distant hall, and your mind reaches for them, even though you know they are out of reach. The dungeon is cruelly efficient in teaching that desire is only a source of pain here. And then there is the sickness. Hunger weakens the body's defenses, leaving prisoners open to infections, fevers, and disease. A simple wound can become fatal. The dungeon air, heavy and damp, encourages respiratory infections. Skin eruptions appear in those who cannot maintain hygiene. Those who survive long enough begin to exhibit strange, desperate behaviors, biting fingernails, gnawing on cloth, even eating things they would have otherwise rejected. The body, when pushed beyond its limits, begins to betray the mind. Your thoughts, once orderly, begin to loop on a single question: how long before I give in? And yet, there is a lesson even here, cruel as it is. Hunger teaches endurance. Hunger teaches creativity. Hunger teaches the sharp, painful edge of human resilience. Some survive by observing the smallest patterns in the guards' routines. Some survive by forming fragile alliances with other prisoners. Some survive by shutting down parts of themselves entirely, ignoring pain, ignoring fear, ignoring hunger for as long as possible. By the fourth week, you have changed. You are smaller, quieter. Every movement is calculated to conserve energy. Every breath is measured. The dungeon has become a teacher, cruel and patient, showing you the limits of what you can endure. You have learned to listen to your stomach, to ration, to observe, to wait. And yet, deep down, you know the truth. It is not enough. The dungeon demands more than strength. It demands endurance beyond what most humans can bear, a constant vigilance that can break even the strongest will. And this is only the beginning. Because hunger, as you now know, is patient. It will wait. It will gnaw. It will sharpen every fear, every doubt, every ache into something almost unendurable. And when you think you can bear it no longer, it will remind you, mercy is not part of its curriculum. The medieval dungeon teaches one thing above all: the smallest lapse, the slightest weakness, and it will consume you. Not with blades, or fire, or chains, but with the most basic force of all, the relentless, gnawing, unyielding need to survive. The cold in a medieval dungeon is not like any cold you have felt outside. It does not come and go with the weather. It does not retreat when the sun rises. It has a permanence, a patience, a way of settling deep into your very bones and refusing to leave. At first, you notice it in your fingers. They become stiff, clumsy, unresponsive. You rub them together, stamp your feet, but the sensation only spreads. Your toes, your knees, your shoulders, every joint feels like it has been wrapped in ice. The walls themselves seem to exhale frost. Stone is colder than you imagined possible, absorbing the heat of your body and leaving you shivering despite every effort to stay warm. The dungeon has no windows. The air is heavy, damp, and smells of mildew and decay. Every breath feels like inhaling a shadow. Your lungs ache as they try to warm the cold as it passes through. Sleep becomes a cruelly elusive thing because warmth is a requirement you cannot meet. Your body begins to prioritize survival over comfort, shutting down extremities to protect the core. Your hands go numb, your feet stiffen, and your teeth chatter, even when you press them together. The first night is always the hardest. You huddle against a stone wall, curling inward like an animal, arms wrapped around your torso. The floor offers no comfort. It is unforgiving and damp. A thin, tattered blanket lies in the corner, half rotted and useless against the relentless cold. You try to close your eyes, but your mind refuses. The cold reminds you constantly of its presence. Every muscle aches, every bone complains, and your teeth chatter as if they have a voice of their own. Hunger, which you have already begun to feel acutely, intensifies the sensation. Without sufficient food, your body cannot generate the warmth it needs. Your metabolism slows, forcing your body to burn what little energy remains. You shiver harder, teeth chattering louder, fingers curling and uncurling as if to shake the cold away. Sleep is broken, shallow, haunted by dreams of fire and warmth that disappear as soon as you awaken. You notice small details that make the cold worse. Water drips from the ceiling and freezes almost immediately when it lands on a stone floor. Your clothing clings to your skin, soaked from condensation, cooling even further as it presses against your body. Rats scurry in the corners, their little bodies warm and quick, their survival starkly contrasted against your own fading strength. You realize quickly that everything here has adapted, except you. You begin to walk the corridors, hoping to generate heat through movement. Each step is a battle. Your legs feel heavy, your feet numb, and the further you move, the more exhaustion sets in. You think of the outside world, of the warm sun and soft breeze, but such thoughts are almost painful now, a cruel reminder of what is denied to you. The cold attacks more than just the body. It attacks the mind. You notice your thoughts slowing, fogging over like the frost that creeps along the stone walls. Decisions take longer. Simple calculations falter. The dungeon is patient, and it knows that the cold is not just a physical threat, it is a psychological one. Every hour spent shivering and desperate wears at your will. Every shiver feels like an accusation. You are not made for this. Sleep, when it finally comes, is merciless. You wake in the middle of the night, muscles stiff, teeth chattering, sweat mixing with the cold to form a damp chill that penetrates even deeper than before. Dreams offer no relief. They are filled with images of ice, darkness, and stone closing in. You realize that, even unconscious, you cannot escape. Disease follows the cold closely. Frostbite is a constant threat. Your fingers and toes tingle and turn a pale, waxy blue. Joints swell painfully. Blisters form, and every movement sends jolts of pain through your body. If the cold persists, gangrene can set in, and with it, a slow, unstoppable decay. No healer can help you here. No warmth can save what is lost. The dungeon claims its victims patiently, one frozen limb at a time. And then there are the guards, distant, indifferent, and cruel. They do not intervene. They do not care. Their interest is in punishment and deterrence, not compassion. They have seen countless prisoners succumb to the cold. They know that the walls themselves will finish the job. To survive, you must outlast both them and the environment. You begin to learn small strategies. Press your back against warmer walls. Cover your extremities with scraps of cloth. Move slowly, conserving energy while generating minimal heat. Count your shivering, time your breaths. Try to ignore the relentless ache in your muscles. These techniques prolong life, but they do not end suffering. The cold is constant, insistent, and unforgiving. It teaches endurance, yes, but only by stripping away everything else: comfort, dignity, hope. You learn to separate mind from body, to endure pain as if it is nothing, because the alternative is surrender. Weeks pass, and the dungeon becomes a crucible. You see prisoners who have adapted slightly, but at a cost. Their bodies are gaunt, their skin pale, their hands gnarled from frost and malnutrition. They move with careful deliberation, speaking little. Conversation is too exhausting, Laughter is a memory of a world that no longer exists. The cold has claimed its psychological toll as surely as it has claimed flesh. Water, when found, is a blessing and a curse. It provides life, but it is always cold, often mixed with dirt or worse. Drink too much, and your body cannot maintain its core temperature. Drink too little, and dehydration sets in. Every choice is a calculation between pain, risk, and survival. The dungeon offers no mercy, no respite. Every corridor, every cell, every shadowed corner is a reminder that survival is measured in minutes, hours, and days. The cold is patient, unyielding, and it will outlast you if you let it. Hunger, filth, disease, and darkness work together, but the cold is the master. By the end of the third week, your thoughts focus entirely on warmth. Every memory, every fantasy, every hope is a vision of fire, sun, blankets, or the heat of another human being. You may even hallucinate warmth, imagining the sun on your skin or a fire burning nearby. But these visions are fleeting, cruel reminders of what you have lost. And still, the dungeon is not done with you. It will push, pull, and probe your limits. It will teach you endurance, patience, and caution. But it will never reward comfort, kindness, or mercy. To survive, you will need more than strength. You will need cunning, vigilance, and a willpower honed sharper than any blade. You will need to endure the relentless hunger, the gnawing frost, and the slow erosion of mind and body. And deep down, you know the truth. The cold will outlast most who enter. Most who try to endure will fail. And if you are not prepared, you will not survive a single week, let alone a month. The dungeon has claimed more bodies than the battlefield, more spirits than the plague, and more hopes than any human could count. The cold is patient, but it is absolute. And if you have not learned by now, it will be the first to teach you. In a medieval dungeon, comfort is a lie, and survival is a constant, bitter struggle. The dungeon teaches lessons with a cruel consistency. One of the harshest comes not from hunger, not from cold, but from the air itself. Thick, oppressive, heavy with decay. The first thing you notice upon entering a new corridor is the smell. At first, it is faint, almost imperceptible, masked by the cold or the damp stone. But then it grows. The scent of sweat, unwashed bodies, spoiled food, and stagnant water mingles with the earthy aroma of stone. You inhale too deeply once, and the odor hits like a physical blow, making your stomach churn and your throat tighten. The dungeon has claimed the simplest things, clean air, fresh water, and turned them into luxuries you cannot reach. The silence of the dungeon is deceptive. Outside, silence is calm, a respite. Inside, silence is alive. It presses against you from all sides, filling every crack, every corner, every empty space. It amplifies every small sound, the drip of water from a broken pipe, the scurrying of rats, the distant clank of a chain, until it feels as if the walls themselves are whispering. You begin to speak less, if at all, because even your own voice feels intrusive, too loud against the oppressive stillness. And yet, silence is not emptiness. It carries memory. The screams of the past, the whispered prayers of prisoners long gone, the desperate scratching of nails against stone, all of it seems to linger, like ghosts pressed into the mortar. Even when no one else is present, you feel watched, judged, recorded in some intangible ledger of suffering. The dungeon is patient, and its memory is long. Filth is everywhere. The floors are damp and covered with refuse from countless occupants. Urine and waste seep into cracks, leaving pools of stinking water that you must step around or risk slipping. Mold creeps along the walls, patches of green and black that make the air feel even heavier, almost unbreathable. Your clothes, already damp from cold and sweat, cling to your skin and begin to carry the same odor. No matter what you do, you cannot escape it. The dungeon surrounds you with decay, reminding you constantly that life here is a struggle against the inevitable. Rats and vermin are the dungeon's constant companions. They move with boldness, gnawing on scraps, nibbling on whatever is left behind, sometimes even the unfortunate prisoners themselves. You watch them from a distance, both horrified and fascinated. Their survival instincts are sharper than yours, and in this environment, they thrive where humans falter. You begin to understand that even the smallest lapse, a crumb left unattended, a moment of inattention, could have consequences far more immediate than hunger or cold. Sickness spreads easily in these conditions. The combination of dampness, filth, and close quarters is a breeding ground for disease. Skin infections, boils, fevers, and respiratory illnesses ravage prisoners with terrifying speed. You notice early signs in yourself: small chills, minor aches, and a general weariness that no amount of rest can cure. Watching other prisoners, you see how quickly malnutrition, infection, and exhaustion work together to break even the strongest. The dungeon does not forgive weakness, and it rewards no one for luck alone. The stench and the silence work together to erode your mind. Without the comfort of conversation, the reassurance of sunlight, or the variety of smells from outside, your senses begin to distort. The faintest noise startles you. The simplest smell overwhelms you. Your mind searches for distractions, inventing sounds, imagining movement, creating phantoms in the darkness. Sleep becomes fractured and restless, leaving you tired and paranoid. The dungeon teaches patience, yes, but it also teaches terror. A slow, insidious kind of fear that begins in the nose and spreads to the nerves. The psychological toll is relentless. Isolation, filth, cold, and hunger are compounded by the stench and silence, creating a pressure that bends the mind. You start noticing small changes in yourself. You jump at shadows, flinch at sounds, and see movement in the corner of your vision even when none exists. You speak less, smile less, and begin to question what is real and what is imagined. Hallucinations are common, and the dungeon fosters them deliberately. Without stimulus, the mind begins to create its own, often darker than reality. Even the simplest tasks become monumental challenges. Cleaning your hands with the little water available becomes a laborious effort, a fleeting moment of relief in a world otherwise dominated by decay. Eating the meager rations becomes a balance of avoiding contamination while maximizing caloric intake. Every movement is a calculation, every choice a small battle against both the dungeon and your own failing body. You realize quickly that decay is not just physical, it is social and moral. Prisoners, driven by hunger and desperation, will turn against each other. Fights break out over scraps, space, or even imagined slights. Trust is a dangerous commodity. Alliances, when they form, are fragile and temporary. The dungeon thrives on fear and competition, eroding cooperation and empathy. Every prisoner's mind becomes as sharp and as cruel as necessary to survive. The constant presence of vermin and filth teaches observation. You learn to spot rats before they spot you, to avoid the worst puddles, to notice subtle signs of infection in yourself and others. These lessons are harsh, and learning them often comes at a cost: blisters, scratches, minor illnesses, or worse. Survival depends on attention to detail, not luck, and the dungeon punishes even minor mistakes with maximum efficiency. By the third week, your sense of smell, hearing, and touch have heightened painfully. Every odor, every sound, every texture becomes magnified. You can hear water dripping from the ceiling across multiple corridors. You can smell the faintest traces of rot or mildew. The floor beneath your fingers communicates cold, rough, wet information that your mind cannot ignore. The dungeon has forced your senses into a state of hyper-awareness, and yet this awareness is exhausting. Sleep is still elusive. When it comes, it is shallow, haunted by dreams of vermin, darkness, and decay. You awaken frequently, gasping for fresh air that does not exist. Your body is stiff, sore, and increasingly slow to respond. The dungeon is patient, as always, and your body learns that it must endure, or fail. The stench and the silence are lessons in humility. The dungeon forces you to acknowledge how small and fragile life truly is. Your senses, your body, your mind, all have limits, and here those limits are tested daily. The simplest comforts, the most basic necessities have been stripped away. Every inhalation, every sound, every step is a reminder of what you lack and what you cannot reclaim. And yet, within this suffering, a strange survival instinct emerges. You begin to ration your strength, to conserve your energy, to plan even the smallest actions with precision. You observe the patterns of rats, the placement of puddles, the timing of guard rounds. You learn which walls are warmer, which corners are safer, which noises indicate danger. Every day becomes a lesson in strategy and endurance, though the dungeon never makes it easy. By the fourth week, you are changed. The dungeon has claimed a piece of you, as it does every prisoner who survives this long. You move more quietly, speak less, observe more carefully. You have learned the cruelty of decay, the oppression of silence, and the relentless pressure of hunger and cold. These lessons are indelible. You understand, finally, that survival in a medieval dungeon is not about strength alone. It is about patience, vigilance, and the ability to endure conditions that would break most minds and bodies. The dungeon teaches that comfort is a myth, that safety is temporary, and that decay is inevitable. And deep down, you know the truth. Few will survive long enough to see the outside world again. Those who do are changed, hardened, haunted by the stench and the silence of the stone corridors that shaped their minds and bodies alike. The dungeon does not forget, it does not forgive, and it does not show mercy. It teaches survival in its purest, cruelest form. And if you are not prepared, you will succumb. Not immediately, perhaps, but slowly, inevitably, as decay gnaws at your body and silence gnaws at your mind. Freedom is the first thing a dungeon takes from you. Not in the abstract, not in the philosophical sense, but physically, painfully, and relentlessly. Chains, shackles, and iron collars mark your new reality from the moment you step inside. The dungeon does not merely confine, it asserts control over every movement, every gesture, every breath. The first time you feel the cold bite of iron around your wrists or ankles, a shock runs through your body. At first, it is disbelief. Surely this cannot be permanent. But the dungeon does not negotiate. The metal is heavy, unyielding, and designed to remind you that your body is no longer entirely your own. Every step is calculated, every shift measured. You learn quickly that even the smallest motion can become a torment when constrained. The chains are not just a physical burden. They are psychological instruments. They isolate, intimidate, and intimidate again. You feel every link against your skin, cold and biting. Movements you once took for granted, turning, stretching, even raising your arms, are now exercises in endurance. Over time, your body begins to adapt, but the mental toll is far greater. You become acutely aware of every inch of your limitations, every movement monitored by the unforgiving stone walls and the guards who walk the corridors like shadows. Sleep, already difficult in the damp, cold dungeon, becomes nearly impossible when your limbs are restrained. You try to curl, to rest, to forget the bite of iron against skin, but the chains resist. You awaken repeatedly, in discomfort, unable to find a position that soothes both body and mind. Every night is a lesson in patience. Every morning, a reminder that your will is under siege. Chains also teach ingenuity, though at great cost. Prisoners quickly discover that small adjustments, shifting weight, loosening knots, or even angling wrists differently, can alleviate pain temporarily. Some attempt to fashion crude padding from scraps of cloth, hoping to reduce the friction and prevent sores. Yet, these measures are fragile, temporary, and never fully effective. The dungeon ensures that the reminder of restraint is constant. Movement is laborious. Every step becomes deliberate. Walking, crouching, standing all require coordination, focus, and energy. The more restricted your body is, the more aware you become of its weaknesses. You notice blisters forming, joints aching, skin chafing against metal. The chains do not just bind your body, they bind your experience of space itself. Corridors feel longer, cells feel smaller, and time feels stretched as every action is slowed by the weight of restraint. Punishment cells take this to another level. Small, dark spaces, designed to exacerbate isolation, often combine chains with extreme confinement. Prisoners may be forced to sit for hours, or even days, with barely enough room to move. The walls are close enough to feel as though they might crush you. The dungeon revels in the cruelty of compressed space, magnifying discomfort into mental anguish. In these cells, sensory deprivation is nearly total. The cold bites harder, the stench becomes unbearable, and the silence deepens. Prisoners are left alone with their thoughts, their fears, and the chains that bite at their flesh. Over time, isolation distorts perception. Hours may feel like days, minutes like centuries. Your mind seeks distraction where none exists, creating phantom sounds, imagined shadows, and even hallucinated threats. Chains also enforce hierarchy and control. Guards use them not only to restrain, but to assert dominance. A simple clink of iron across stone is enough to remind prisoners that they are powerless. Requests for water or minimal comfort are often ignored or punished, and any attempt to resist is met with swift retribution. The dungeon operates on a principle of total control: body, mind, and spirit. Resistance is optional. Survival is mandatory. The physical pain of chains is relentless. Abrasion against skin leads to sores, bleeding, and eventual infection if untreated. Limbs left in a single position for too long become numb or stiff. Blood circulation slows, and joint damage occurs with repeated use. Yet even this suffering is part of the dungeon's calculus. It teaches endurance through pain and patience through suffering. Over time, prisoners adapt to the chains. You notice small efficiencies: shifting weight to relieve pressure, using walls to support the body, resting in ways that minimize discomfort. But these adaptations are fragile, temporary. A sudden movement, a shift by a guard, or the placement of another prisoner in close proximity can undo hours of careful adjustment. The dungeon thrives on unpredictability. Chains also change behavior. Prisoners become cautious, hesitant, hyper-aware of every movement. Conversation becomes sparse, limited to necessary communication. Social interaction is strained because movement itself carries risk. You begin to understand that confinement is as much a mental exercise as a physical one. The mind learns to ration attention, energy, and emotion in order to survive. The psychological effects are profound. Constant restraint, coupled with isolation, cold, and hunger, creates a sense of hopelessness that is difficult to overcome. Your thoughts circle endlessly, often returning to one theme: escape, survival, or despair. Many prisoners succumb to apathy, allowing themselves to be consumed by the dungeon's oppressive weight. Those who resist most develop extraordinary focus, discipline, and mental toughness, qualities that may prolong survival but never eliminate suffering. Chains also serve as a cruel reminder of dependence. Every step, every action is constrained. You are at the mercy of guards, the environment, and the chain itself. This enforced dependence erodes autonomy, pride, and self-confidence. The dungeon is patient, teaching that freedom is a fragile illusion and that true autonomy exists only outside its walls. Despite all this, some prisoners find ways to endure. They adapt to the rhythm of the dungeon, learn to manage pain, ration energy, and maintain vigilance. They watch the guards' routines, anticipate patterns, and form fragile alliances with others. These strategies provide temporary relief, but the chains are constant. They never forget, they never yield, and they never offer comfort. The dungeon also teaches observation. You notice how prisoners interact with chains, how they move, how they rest, how they conserve energy. Every action has consequences, every mistake magnified. The environment rewards awareness, patience, and calculated endurance. By the third or fourth week, your body is shaped by restraint. Muscles weaken, joints stiffen, and calluses form where skin rubs against metal. Your mind is sharpened in some ways, hyper-aware of your body, your environment, your limited options, but dulled in others, numbed by constant stress and discomfort. Every sensation becomes a lesson in survival. Pain is constant, but attention and awareness are sharper than ever. Chains, confinement, and control define every aspect of dungeon life. They strip away comfort, dignity, and autonomy. They force prisoners to confront their limits repeatedly, testing both body and mind. Every movement is an exercise in patience, every decision a test of endurance, every day a battle for existence. By now, you understand the cruel paradox. Chains are simultaneously the source of suffering and the teacher of survival. They bind you, limit you, and hurt you, but they also focus your mind, sharpen your instincts, and force you to learn strategies for endurance. Yet these lessons come at a cost that is rarely bearable for long. The dungeon does not apologize, it does not negotiate, and it does not show mercy. Chains are one of its most effective tools, combining physical torment with psychological oppression. The longer you remain, the more profound their effect. And if you are not prepared, the chains will claim you as surely as hunger or cold. Survival requires strength, ingenuity, and mental discipline. But even with these, the chains are a constant, biting reminder of what you have lost: freedom, comfort, and the illusion of control. And deep down, you know the truth. Most prisoners do not endure chains for long. They break, not all at once, but slowly, in pieces, until the dungeon has claimed body, mind, and spirit. To survive, you must be smarter, tougher, and more patient than nearly anyone could expect. Even then, the chains do not forgive. They only remind you, again and again, that in a medieval dungeon, freedom is gone, and life is nothing more than measured endurance. In a medieval dungeon, survival is never just a matter of enduring hunger, cold, or chains. Fear is the invisible force that rules everything, and the guards are its enforcers. They do not just monitor you, they embody the relentless authority of the dungeon, a living, breathing reminder that your life is not your own. The guards move through the corridors like shadows, their presence felt even when they are not seen. Each footstep echoes off stone walls, a drumbeat in the silence. You notice the rhythm of their patrols almost instinctively. 3 steps down the hall, a pause, a turn, and then the distant clatter of iron keys jangling. Each noise becomes meaningful. Every shadow becomes suspicious. Even when you convince yourself they are far away, you know that their attention could shift in an instant, altering the course of your day, your week, or even your life. Rules in the dungeon are capricious, fluid, and terrifyingly specific. There is no written code available to prisoners. Rules are enforced verbally and by action. Move too quickly, speak too loudly, or fail to respond promptly, and you might find yourself punished. Punishments are arbitrary, but consistently designed to instill fear. A guard might knock a prisoner to the ground for speaking out of turn, or for failing to perform a menial task correctly. Others might be left in the coldest part of the dungeon, stripped of even minimal warmth, as a reminder of their place in the hierarchy. The unpredictability of the guard's behavior is central to their control. You can never be sure what will provoke punishment. One prisoner may be scolded for leaning against a wall, while another is ignored for similar behavior. This uncertainty ensures that vigilance is constant and stress is continuous. Fear is never fully rational in the dungeon. It is instinctual, pervasive, and unavoidable. Guards are not just enforcers. They are teachers of obedience. Their presence forces you to anticipate expectations, to calculate movements and words with precision. You learn quickly that silence is often safer than speech, that stillness can protect you from notice, and that even minor gestures can have major consequences. Yet, they are not omnipotent. Occasionally, mistakes occur. Doors left unlocked, routines disrupted, or moments when a guard's attention wanders. These instances are rare, but treasured by prisoners. Small glimpses of relief in a world designed to strip comfort and hope. Even these fleeting moments are fraught with tension. Any sudden shift in the guard's attention could turn freedom into punishment in an instant. The psychological impact of constant observation is profound. Prisoners quickly internalize the guard's authority, becoming self-policing. You notice that you begin to check your own behavior as though a guard were always present, even when you are alone. Movements become precise, speech measured, and gestures controlled. Your mind learns to anticipate threat before it occurs, an instinctive survival mechanism honed under relentless pressure. Guards also exploit prisoners' vulnerabilities. Hunger, cold, illness, and exhaustion are opportunities for control. A prisoner weak from malnutrition may be forced to perform tasks that test their limits. Another, shivering from cold, might be subjected to ridicule or pushed further into discomfort. The dungeon's design is not only structural but psychological. The guards ensure that physical weakness translates into fear, and fear translates into obedience. Punishment takes many forms, some subtle, some overt. There are whippings, beatings, and extended periods in chains or cold cells. There are verbal abuses, mockery, and intimidation. Occasionally, solitary confinement is employed, a method designed to crush the spirit by isolating the prisoner completely. Sleep deprivation, restricted access to food or water, and exposure to damp, freezing air are all tools of the guard's trade. Each method reinforces the lesson that the dungeon is a world of constant, unavoidable vigilance. One particularly cruel tactic is unpredictability in enforcement. Guards might enforce a rule one day and ignore it the next. This inconsistency prevents prisoners from adjusting behavior comfortably. It ensures that anxiety is a constant companion. Prisoners learn to overcorrect, to anticipate danger in every gesture, which only adds to mental exhaustion. The dungeon thrives on this tension, the fine balance between punishment and mercy, and the uncertainty of which will come next. Despite their dominance, guards are not monsters without humanity. Some follow routines mechanically, indifferent to suffering, while others exhibit moments of harsh amusement or cruelty. Occasionally, a prisoner might find a guard who is less vigilant, a moment of reprieve that allows for minor comfort or strategic advantage. Yet, the dungeon ensures that even the kindest guard is constrained by the system, their behavior governed by hierarchy, protocol, and personal gain. Observation becomes a tool for survival. You learn to read the guards' moods, anticipate their movements, and predict their reactions. Small gestures, a tilt of the head, a shift in posture, the pace of footsteps become significant. The guards are both a threat and a source of information. Understanding them, in even the smallest ways, increases your chances of survival, though it does not eliminate fear. The social dynamic among prisoners is shaped heavily by the presence of guards. Trust is limited, alliances fragile, and cooperation often tempered by fear of being noticed or reported. Any deviation from expected behavior risks punishment for both you and those around you. The guards, intentionally or not, foster an environment where isolation is safer than collaboration. Community exists only in whispers, glances, or the briefest gestures. The rules, too, are a tool of psychological warfare. Certain behaviors are rewarded while others are punished, but the criteria are never fully clear. A prisoner might be allowed to eat first one day, denied the next, or even punished for behavior previously tolerated. This unpredictability fosters anxiety, hypervigilance, and submission, all critical to the dungeon's control strategy. Even minor infractions can have disproportionate consequences. A guard's annoyance might result in extra chains, forced labor, or confinement in colder, more isolated cells. These punishments are often as much about teaching a lesson to others as they are about penalizing the individual. The dungeon operates as a theater of control, where fear is performed publicly and reinforced constantly. By the third week, prisoners internalize the guard's presence. The threat becomes psychological as much as physical. Every sound, every movement, every shadow carries weight. Your behavior is filtered through imagined scrutiny as much as actual observation. You learn to move quietly, speak minimally, and anticipate consequences before they occur. The mind adapts to survive, but the cost is constant tension and mental fatigue. The fear imposed by guards is compounded by the dungeon's environment. Cold, hunger, chains, and filth amplify vulnerability. Every weakness is exploited, every lapse punished, every minor advantage denied. The guards are extensions of the dungeon's will, ensuring that control is total, constant, and inescapable. Survival requires not only physical endurance, but mental resilience, observation, and strategic thinking. By the fourth week, fear has become a constant companion. You learn to respect its presence, to anticipate its manifestations, and to use it to sharpen your survival instincts. You recognize that the guards, while not omnipotent, are highly effective instruments of control. They combine authority, unpredictability, and psychological insight to maintain dominance, ensuring that prisoners remain compliant, vigilant, and subdued. The lesson of the guards is clear. In a medieval dungeon, your body may endure hunger, cold, and chains, but your mind is equally tested. Fear, unpredictability, and authority shape every decision, every action, every thought. The dungeon teaches that survival is as much about mental discipline and awareness as it is about physical strength. And if you are not prepared, the guards will remind you, quietly, relentlessly, and unmistakably, that the dungeon owns not only your body, but the very space of your mind. The dungeon does not only attack the body, it attacks the mind. After days or weeks, the physical discomfort of cold, hunger, chains becomes intertwined with a far more insidious threat, psychological torment. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow crossing the corner of your vision, but soon it consumes you entirely. Sleep, already difficult due to cold and discomfort, becomes fragmented and shallow. You lay on the stone floor, damp and aching, and find that exhaustion offers no relief. When your eyes close, your mind conjures visions of fear and despair, Shadows twist into impossible forms. Sounds that do not exist, dripping water, scratching rats, distant footsteps, echo in your ears. The dungeon has a way of making reality feel unreliable. The first nightmares are vivid but fleeting. You wake startled, heart pounding, and convince yourself it was just a dream. But night after night, the visions return, longer and more intense. Prisoners appear, screaming in impossible agony, or you see yourself trapped in tighter, darker spaces than the cell itself allows. You feel the cold of the dungeon in your dream, as though your body cannot distinguish the real from the imagined. The walls of your cell seem to close in during both sleep and waking hours, blurring the line between dream and reality. Isolation amplifies the effect. In solitary confinement or sparsely populated cells, the mind fills the emptiness with imagined presences. You may hear voices whispering, feel invisible hands brushing against your skin, or see fleeting figures at the edge of vision. These hallucinations are terrifyingly real, convincing your senses that the dungeon has taken on a sentient, malevolent quality. Even when alone, you never truly feel safe. Repetition compounds mental strain. The endless days of monotony, punctuated only by brief, unpredictable contact with guards, are as punishing as hunger or cold. Without meaningful engagement, the mind becomes hyper-focused on minor stimuli, the rhythm of dripping water, the scurrying of rats, the shifting of shadows. Every detail is magnified, every sound exaggerated, every slight sensation a potential threat. Your mind begins to anticipate terror even when none exists, a self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety. Hallucinations become increasingly vivid. Some prisoners report hearing chains rattle when no one is nearby, feeling phantom cold or pressure, and imagining footsteps that never come. Others see grotesque shapes or faces in the stone walls, or dream of being trapped in impossibly tight spaces. Fear begins to warp perception. Even minor events, a rat skittering past, a gust of wind from a door, can trigger panic. Sleep deprivation is one of the dungeon's most effective weapons. Guards may intentionally rouse prisoners, leaving them no chance to rest. Cold, hunger, and discomfort prevent deep sleep naturally. Over days, lack of rest erodes judgment, heightens paranoia, and weakens emotional resilience. You may begin to lose track of time, counting days in cycles of darkness and discomfort rather than hours or dates. Dreams merge into waking hallucinations, and reality becomes a haze of fear and exhaustion. Your thoughts spiral. The mind, deprived of stimulation, focuses obsessively on survival, but also on hypothetical dangers, past regrets, and imagined threats. Anxiety becomes constant. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and filled with nightmares. You awaken disoriented, unable to distinguish dream from reality. Every shadow is suspect, every noise amplified. The dungeon trains your mind to expect terror at all times. The sensory deprivation of the dungeon heightens the psychological assault. Limited exposure to light, lack of conversation, and absence of variety create a void in which the mind fills its own horrors. Prisoners may begin to imagine guards watching when they are not, feel invisible hands touching them, or hear voices of people long gone. Time slows in a way that seems unnatural, and the days stretch interminably. Mental breakdowns are common. Some prisoners retreat entirely into their own minds, refusing to speak, eat, or move. Others lash out, attacking fellow prisoners or even themselves in panic. The dungeon's combination of isolation, deprivation, and constant threat creates an environment in which rational thought is difficult, if not impossible. Even those who survive physically may suffer permanent psychological damage. Fear becomes internalized. You anticipate punishment, cold, hunger, and hallucinations simultaneously, learning to monitor your own reactions to keep panic at bay. Hypervigilance is both protective and exhausting. Your muscles tense constantly, your heartbeat races even when no immediate threat exists, and your thoughts never cease. Every sound, every shadow, every minor discomfort is filtered through the lens of fear. Paranoia takes hold. You may suspect other prisoners of plotting against you, guards of taking pleasure in your torment, or even your own senses of betraying you. Decisions are slowed by overanalysis. Movements are cautious, speech minimal, actions calculated. Your survival depends on these strategies, but they also erode mental flexibility, spontaneity, and hope. Psychological torment is compounded by observation of other prisoners. You witness hallucinations, breakdowns, fights, and despair. Their suffering reinforces your own fear, teaching you lessons in caution, patience, and vigilance. Every event is a reminder that survival is never guaranteed, and that the dungeon's influence reaches beyond the physical into the mind. Even minor lapses in mental control are punished, indirectly or directly. A misstep caused by fatigue or fear may draw the attention of guards. A shouted word, a dropped item, or an unguarded movement could provoke anger, ridicule, or physical punishment. The dungeon ensures that mental weakness is as dangerous as physical weakness. By the third week, your mind has adapted in strange ways. You learn to monitor hallucinations, distinguishing them from reality as best you can. You practice counting, memorizing patterns, or repeating phrases to maintain focus. Sleep, when it occurs, is brief and strategic, just enough to allow minimal recovery. Attention to detail, vigilance, and emotional control become critical skills. But the psychological toll is cumulative. Even survivors describe feeling haunted, hyper-aware, and fragile long after leaving the dungeon. Nightmares continue, memories of sensory deprivation linger, and the fear instilled by guards, chains, and isolation remains palpable. The dungeon does not merely punish the body, it reshapes the mind entirely. The combination of fear, deprivation, and uncertainty produces a unique survival challenge. You cannot simply endure the cold, hunger, or chains alone. You must endure your mind. Mental resilience becomes as essential as physical strength. You learn to ration attention, prioritize threats, and maintain a fragile grip on reality. By the fourth week, the dungeon has taught a harsh truth. Survival is a balance of body and mind. One without the other is insufficient. Physical endurance without mental control leads to panic and mistakes. Mental awareness without physical capability leaves you vulnerable to cold, hunger, and disease. Both must be sharpened, honed, and maintained constantly. The dungeon's lessons are unforgiving but consistent. Fear is a tool, a teacher, and a constant companion. Psychological torment ensures that every movement, thought, and decision is filtered through caution and calculation. Hallucinations, nightmares, and paranoia are not signs of weakness. They are responses to an environment designed to challenge and destabilize. By understanding these effects, a prisoner gains a marginal advantage. They learn to anticipate hallucinations, manage fear, ration attention, and maintain vigilance. Survival depends on mastering both the physical and psychological elements of the dungeon. And yet, even mastery provides no guarantee. The dungeon is patient, relentless, and adaptive. Guards, chains, cold, hunger, and filth remain, all reinforced by the omnipresent psychological pressure. Any lapse in attention, any misstep in judgment, could undo weeks of careful endurance. Survival is fragile, temporary, and never assured. In the end, the dungeon proves one immutable lesson. The mind can be as dangerous to its host as the chains or cold that bind the body. Hallucinations, fear, and isolation are tools as effective as iron or stone, and few who experience them emerge unchanged. The dungeon does not merely test strength, it tests sanity. And in this environment, the fragile human mind is often the first casualty. In a medieval dungeon, survival is often measured in meals, or more accurately, in the lack thereof. Hunger is constant, insidious, and inescapable. Unlike the cold or chains, which press against your body in obvious ways, the absence of food gnaws silently, slowly corroding both body and mind. Each day without proper nourishment becomes an endurance test, and even the simplest sustenance is a gamble. Food in the dungeon is scarce, meager, and often barely edible. A thin broth, a small loaf of stale bread, or a portion of gruel might be all that separates prisoners from near starvation. The rations are designed to sustain life minimally, not comfortably. Hunger sharpens the senses, sure, but it also dulls patience, amplifies fear, and breeds desperation. Every crumb becomes precious, every sip of water a fleeting relief. The quality of food is as punishing as the quantity. Bread is often moldy, broth thin and flavorless, and any scraps of meat are more likely to harbor disease than to nourish. Spoiled food carries the risk of sickness, but refusal often means going hungry entirely. Prisoners are forced into impossible decisions: risk illness for sustenance, or endure the slow decay of starvation. Over time, the body becomes attuned to minimal intake, metabolism slowing, muscles weakening, and energy reserves shrinking. Water, ostensibly more abundant than food, is also a source of danger. Stagnant pools in the dungeon may be the only source, and their quality is dubious at best. Contaminated water spreads disease, exacerbates existing illnesses, and weakens the body further. Rationing becomes essential. Prisoners learn to drink sparingly, savoring each mouthful as though it were gold. Dehydration is relentless, and its effects, dizziness, confusion, headaches, add another layer of mental strain to an already punishing environment. The scarcity of food and water amplifies the social dynamics among prisoners. Competition is subtle yet constant. Those who manage to secure slightly more than their share gain leverage, respect, or a temporary reprieve from weakness. Others are forced to beg, barter, or steal. Even in these small contests, the dungeon enforces its rules with ruthless efficiency. Theft is punished, hoarding discouraged, and sharing left entirely to the mercy of circumstance. creativity becomes a survival skill. Prisoners learn to scavenge, improvise, and ration. Stale bread may be softened in water or crumbled into gruel. Small scraps are hidden in clothing or hair, consumed slowly to stave off hunger. Even the tiniest remnant, a scrap of dried meat, a leaf, a piece of moldy bread, is transformed into a vital resource. Survival depends on ingenuity and caution, and miscalculations can have fatal consequences. Hunger also magnifies discomfort from other dungeon conditions. The cold bites deeper, fatigue strikes harder, and chains become even more oppressive. Without sufficient energy, the body's natural defenses weaken, illness spreads faster, wounds heal slower, and exhaustion becomes nearly unbearable. Prisoners realize that the dungeon's design is cumulative. Every hardship compounds the others, and scarcity of food is one of the most effective tools of torment. The mind, deprived of nutrients, begins to falter. Decision-making slows, attention diminishes, and irritability rises. Anxiety, paranoia, and hallucinations are intensified by prolonged hunger. Prisoners may dream obsessively of food, imagining smells, tastes, and textures that no longer exist. The mental strain of constant deprivation can be as debilitating as the physical pain of chains or cold. Starvation also fosters a dangerous form of social instability. Weakened prisoners may become desperate, lashing out at guards or fellow captives in hopes of acquiring additional sustenance. Alliances are temporary, trust is fragile, and conflict over food is frequent. Even minor infractions, a stolen scrap of bread, a misused ration, can trigger punishment or retaliation. The dungeon thrives on this tension, using scarcity to ensure that cooperation is rare and competition is constant. Some prisoners attempt to supplement their meager rations by foraging within the dungeon. Mold, roots, or discarded scraps become invaluable resources. Yet these efforts carry risks. Contaminated food can lead to sickness, and any movement outside designated areas may draw the guards' attention, leading to punishment. Even survival strategies are perilous, balancing opportunity against risk in a daily test of judgment. The psychological impact of famine cannot be overstated. Hunger magnifies every fear, every discomfort, and every sense of vulnerability. Prisoners obsess over the timing and distribution of food, counting calories with precision, rationing every mouthful. Dreams and memories of meals from the outside world haunt the mind. Even small amounts of food elicit overwhelming relief and gratitude, a fleeting reprieve from the relentless pressure of deprivation. Hunger also teaches patience. Painful, exhausting patience. Waiting for rations, carefully allocating portions, and enduring long periods without sustenance become daily exercises in restraint. Impatience or impulsive consumption can have disastrous consequences, leading to sickness or accelerated exhaustion. Survival is not only a matter of securing food, but also of knowing how and when to consume it. Dehydration introduces an additional layer of danger. The body's response to insufficient water is rapid and severe. Dizziness, confusion, rapid heartbeat, and eventually organ failure. Prisoners must carefully balance the need to drink against the potential for contaminated water. Every decision is life-threatening. Every sip a calculated risk. Hydration is not just a matter of comfort. It is a matter of survival, and its absence compounds every other hardship in the dungeon. Rations, limited as they are also carefully timed by guards to maximize control. Irregular meals prevent prisoners from establishing routine, heighten anxiety, and enforce dependence. Hunger is weaponized, a subtle but powerful form of control that reinforces the authority of the dungeon and its keepers. Even the act of eating becomes fraught with fear and caution. Move too quickly, speak too loudly, or display satisfaction, and punishment may follow. By the third week, the effects of hunger and thirst are unmistakable. Muscles weaken, reflexes slow, and mental acuity diminishes. The body's energy reserves are depleted, and even small tasks, moving, adjusting chains, or standing, require enormous effort. The mind, overtaxed by fear, isolation, and deprivation, begins to ration attention, focusing on immediate survival while ignoring long-term considerations. The combined effects of scarcity, psychological stress, and environmental hardship create a perfect storm of suffering. Prisoners are trapped in a feedback loop. Hunger increases susceptibility to cold and illness. Fatigue amplifies fear and paranoia. Stress magnifies hallucinations and nightmares. Every hardship reinforces the others, ensuring that survival is a continuous, exhausting struggle. In some rare cases, prisoners develop remarkable resilience. They ration effectively, improvise creatively, and endure with extraordinary mental fortitude. Observation of others' strategies becomes a tool for survival. Still, even the strongest are not immune to the cumulative effects of deprivation. The dungeon's design ensures that hunger, thirst, and scarcity are constant, unrelenting pressures, testing both body and mind. Ultimately, survival in the dungeon depends on understanding scarcity as more than a physical challenge. Food and water are not merely necessities. They are instruments of control, tools of punishment, and measures of mental resilience. Prisoners must anticipate shortages, ration carefully, and maintain psychological strength while enduring constant deprivation. The lesson is stark. In a medieval dungeon, hunger is a weapon, thirst is a tormentor, and rationing is both a strategy and a necessity. Those who endure do so through a combination of patience, ingenuity, and mental toughness, but the dungeon never relents. Food may be granted, water provided, yet the memory of scarcity, fear, and deprivation lingers, shaping the prisoner long after the dungeon walls have faded from view. In a medieval dungeon, death does not always arrive with the clang of iron or the lash of a whip. It creeps silently, invisibly, carried on the breath of those around you, hidden in the stagnant air, and nourished by the filth and decay that permeate every corner. Disease is as much a jailer as chains, as relentless as hunger, and often more merciless than any guard. From the moment you enter, you are exposed to the pathogens that thrive in confined, overcrowded, and poorly ventilated spaces. The air is heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, mold, mildew, and human waste. Bacteria and parasites flourish in these conditions, spreading easily among prisoners weakened by hunger, cold, and psychological stress. Simple cuts or abrasions can become fatal without proper treatment, while coughs, fevers, and rashes travel unchecked. Contagion spreads rapidly in the dungeon. One prisoner's illness becomes everyone's risk. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and influenza were common killers in medieval prisons, and their victims often suffered for days or weeks before succumbing. Isolation of the sick is minimal or non-existent, ensuring that illness circulates freely. Guards may move between cells, inadvertently transmitting infection. Even the strongest and healthiest prisoners are vulnerable. The filth of the dungeon exacerbates the problem. Floors are rarely cleaned, walls are damp, and vermin scurry freely. Rats, mice, and insects not only consume scraps of food, but also carry deadly diseases. Their bites and droppings spread pathogens. Prisoners often share their meager rations with these scavengers unwillingly, further increasing risk of illness. A single scratch from a rat could become life-threatening if left untreated. Poor hygiene compounds the danger. Bathing is infrequent or forbidden, clothing is seldom changed, and bodily waste accumulates. Skin infections, lice, and other infestations are common, weakening prisoners and making them susceptible to more serious illness. The dungeon environment ensures that even minor health issues escalate rapidly, turning small wounds or irritations into deadly threats. Medical care, when it exists, is rudimentary at best. A medieval jailer or monk might apply poultices, herbs, or other primitive remedies, but knowledge is limited, and infections often progress unchecked. Bloodletting, herbal concoctions, and superstition often do more harm than good. For prisoners, survival depends on luck as much as strategy. The presence or absence of disease can decide life or death with brutal efficiency. Disease is only part of the story. Decay and deterioration of the dungeon itself present constant threats. Crumbling walls, leaking roofs, and damp floors ensure that mold and mildew flourish. Wooden doors and furniture rot, producing splinters and hazardous surfaces. Stagnant water pools supporting bacteria and parasites. The very structure of the dungeon is complicit in the spread of illness. Overcrowding amplifies the problem. Multiple prisoners crammed into small cells increase contact and facilitate the transmission of disease. Personal space is non-existent, and privacy is a luxury that does not exist. Every cough, every sneeze, every shared item of clothing or bedding becomes a potential vector for infection. Close quarters also increase stress, agitation, and conflict, which further weaken prisoners' resistance to illness. Hunger and malnutrition intensify vulnerability. A weakened body cannot fight disease effectively. Muscles shrink, immune response diminishes, and energy reserves are depleted. Prisoners who manage to endure chains and cold may still fall victim to infection because their bodies lack the resources to recover. Even minor ailments can spiral into life-threatening conditions, a cruel irony for those who have survived the dungeon's other hardships. Mortality rates are shockingly high. Records from medieval prisons and castles suggest that disease was one of the leading causes of death, often surpassing executions or physical punishment. Dysentery, scurvy, typhoid, and tuberculosis claimed prisoners silently, and sometimes in clusters. The death of one prisoner serves as a grim warning to others, reinforcing fear and despair. Disease also affects the mind. Fear of infection adds to the already crushing psychological weight of chains, cold, hunger, and isolation. Prisoners become hypervigilant, avoiding contact, hoarding scraps, and obsessively monitoring bodily symptoms. Anxiety increases susceptibility to illness, creating a vicious cycle in which mental and physical health deteriorate simultaneously. The dungeon manipulates this interplay expertly. The mind weakens the body, and the body weakens the mind. The decaying environment encourages creative but desperate survival tactics. Prisoners may scavenge mold for medicinal purposes, collect dripping water from walls, or create makeshift bedding from straw and rags. Each attempt at adaptation carries risk. A contaminated source, an insect bite, or exposure to stagnant water can undo weeks of careful endurance. Every choice, every action has consequences, amplified by disease and decay. Rituals and daily routines are also influenced by fear of illness. Prisoners avoid sharing food or water when possible, clean themselves obsessively with scarce resources, and try to separate themselves from the sick. But isolation is rarely possible, and the sick cannot always be quarantined effectively. Even prisoners who appear healthy may harbor pathogens, creating a constant threat. The guards themselves are vectors of disease. Moving between cells, handling prisoners, and distributing rations, they can inadvertently transmit illness. Sometimes the guards intentionally exploit this fear, using disease as a tool to maintain control. Sickness amplifies the prisoner's sense of vulnerability, dependence, and powerlessness, ensuring obedience without the need for overt punishment. Death in the dungeon is often slow and uncertain. Illness progresses gradually, weakening the body, sapping strength, and dulling the mind. Prisoners may lie on the damp stone floor for days or weeks, their bodies wasting away as fever, dehydration, and infection take hold. Companions may succumb first, their deaths witnessed but not preventable, adding to the mental toll. The omnipresence of death reinforces the dungeon's oppressive power, shaping the behavior and mindset of all who remain. Even those who survive the immediate threat of disease are changed permanently. Scars, weakened immune systems, and long-term health issues persist long after release. Mental trauma, anxiety, and paranoia often endure, shaped by weeks of observing decay, illness, and death in close quarters. The dungeon's legacy is as enduring as its walls. In some rare cases, prisoners develop immunity or resilience. Exposure to pathogens, careful observation, and cautious behavior can allow them to survive longer than others. Still, these are exceptions, not the rule. The dungeon's design ensures that disease remains a constant, invisible killer, claiming lives silently while exerting constant pressure on survivors. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. In a medieval dungeon, survival depends not only on enduring chains, cold, and hunger, but also on navigating a world of disease and decay. Every breath, every sip of water, every interaction carries risk. Every cut, scrape, or bite can become fatal. The environment itself conspires against life, turning the simple act of existence into a daily struggle against invisible enemies. By the fourth week, survivors are experts at observing, rationing, and avoiding illness, but even mastery cannot eliminate the ever-present threat. Disease and decay are as much part of the dungeon as stone walls and iron bars. The environment itself is a predator, patient, relentless, and unforgiving. The dungeon proves a brutal truth. Physical strength alone cannot guarantee survival. Awareness, caution, adaptability, and a bit of luck are as critical as endurance. Even then, the invisible killers, disease, decay, and the slow gnaw of starvation ensure that life is tenuous, fragile, and constantly threatened. In the medieval dungeon, death is not always dramatic. It is silent, slow, and pervasive. And for those who remain, the shadow of disease is never far, a constant reminder that survival is as much about avoiding invisible threats as enduring the visible horrors of chains, cold, and fear. In a medieval dungeon, the idea of escape is a tantalizing thought that occupies the mind of nearly every prisoner, yet it is almost always an illusion. The walls, doors, and layout are designed with both physical and psychological constraints that make fleeing nearly impossible. The dungeon is not merely a collection of cells. It is a labyrinth engineered to trap, confuse, and exhaust, ensuring that even the most clever or desperate prisoner is unlikely to succeed. The first obstacle is the sheer physical structure. Dungeon walls are thick stone, sometimes several feet wide, and reinforced with iron bars. Doors are heavy, often locked with complex mechanisms that require keys known only to the guards. Corridors twist and turn, creating disorientation even for those with the sharpest memory. Every exit seems a mirage, possible but ultimately unreachable. Even if you discover a possible weakness, the environment conspires against you. Floors are uneven, stairs narrow and steep, and ceilings low. Darkness is pervasive, limiting visibility and making navigation treacherous. Trip over a loose stone, fall into a hidden hole, or misjudge a step, and the consequences are immediate: injury, noise, or discovery by guards. Every part of the dungeon is designed to punish error, turning escape attempts into physical trials of endurance and skill. Guards are, of course, the ever-present deterrent. They patrol unpredictably, observe, and respond swiftly to any unusual activity. Their familiarity with the dungeon gives them a near-omniscient advantage, while prisoners must operate in uncertainty. Even the slightest sound, a misplaced footstep, a clink of chains, or the shuffle of stone can summon attention, ensuring that the possibility of stealth is fleeting. But it is not only walls and guards that prevent escape. Psychological factors play a significant role. Prisoners quickly learn that hope itself can be weaponized. The idea of fleeing may occupy the mind, but the dungeon ensures that over-planning or hesitation is punished. Time is distorted, days and weeks blur together, eroding confidence and sharpening despair. By the time a prisoner believes they have mapped a potential route, mental fatigue and physical exhaustion may make any attempt impossible. Traps and obstacles are deliberate and subtle. Hidden pits, narrow drop-offs, and loose stones are placed in areas where prisoners might linger or search for weak points. Some dungeons employed secret compartments and false doors to confuse and mislead. A prisoner may push at a section of wall, thinking it will yield passage, only to be met with solid stone or a fall into darkness. These measures exploit not just physical vulnerability, but the natural impatience and desperation of the captive mind. Futility is reinforced by the interconnectedness of punishment. Even if a prisoner manages to bypass a physical barrier, guards and other security measures await in stages. Futility is reinforced by the interconnectedness of punishment. Even if a prisoner manages to bypass a physical barrier, guards and other security measures await in stages. Courtyards, stairwells, and exit corridors are all monitored. Heavy gates may lock automatically or be reinforced with chains and bolts at a moment's notice. Each layer of containment compounds the previous one, creating a sense of endless struggle with no reward. The mental weight of failure is as punishing as the physical constraints. Prisoners learn quickly that the dungeon's design anticipates human nature. Attempt too many times, and fatigue sets in. Hesitate too long, and opportunities vanish. The balance between action and caution is nearly impossible to maintain, and even minor errors can end attempts catastrophically. Every failure reinforces despair, ensuring that prisoners internalize the futility of their situation. Escape attempts are also hindered by the layout of the surrounding castle or prison. Dungeons are often deep underground, with narrow passageways leading to heavily guarded gates or fortified towers. Even if a prisoner bypasses interior defenses, they face daunting external barriers, high walls, moats, and armed sentries. Knowledge of the outside world is limited, so the logistics of navigating beyond the dungeon are often insurmountable. The outside is not a safe haven. It is another obstacle course, fraught with danger. Even the most inventive prisoners, armed with makeshift tools or knowledge gleaned from observing guards, struggle against these constraints. Tools may be rudimentary, a nail, a stone, or a piece of wood, and their effectiveness limited. Any noise produced during attempts at digging, lock-picking, or breaking is immediately dangerous. Guards are alert to minor disturbances, and the risk of detection is ever present. Many prisoners succumb to desperation, attempting reckless maneuvers that result in injury or discovery. Slipping through small gaps, climbing walls with inadequate footing, or attempting to scale stairs under duress often leads to immediate punishment or fatal accidents. The dungeon exploits not only physical weakness, but the psychological pressure to act hastily. The desire to escape becomes both a motivator and a liability. The environment itself is a trap. Darkness, cold, and disorientation sap strength and confidence. Hunger weakens muscles, thirst clouds judgment, and isolation magnifies fear. Even if an escape seems feasible in theory, in practice, the body may betray the mind. Fatigue, trembling hands, or blurred vision can transform minor tasks into impossible feats, ensuring that the dungeon retains control through cumulative stress. Survival during an attempted escape requires more than cleverness or strength. It requires timing, patience, and extraordinary luck. Even minor oversights, a misjudged distance, a misread patrol, or an underestimation of weight, can end the attempt. Prisoners who fail are often punished severely, reinforcing the lesson that escape is not only difficult, but dangerous. The psychological impact of failure is profound. Despair, hopelessness, and fear of retaliation all reinforce submission. Over time, most prisoners abandon thoughts of escape. The dungeon teaches that survival is measured not by fleeing, but by endurance, adaptation, and careful management of body and mind. Any energy expended on impossible attempts is energy lost from more critical survival strategies: conserving warmth, rationing food, avoiding illness, and preserving mental strength. The decision to cease escape efforts is not surrender, but strategy, an acknowledgement of the environment's relentless control. The dungeon is patient. It allows hope to flourish just enough to entice action, then punishes it to reinforce reality. Guards, walls, and obstacles operate in concert, shaping prisoner behavior and ensuring that lessons are learned the hard way. Those who resist, who attempt to outsmart the system, often do so at great risk. The few who succeed are remembered as anomalies, their stories rare exceptions rather than guides to survival. Even for those who endure without escape, the lessons remain indelible. Every step, every failed attempt, every punishment reinforces the understanding that the dungeon is not merely a physical space, but a psychological cage. Mental resilience, observation, and strategic patience become critical skills, essential to navigating the daily horrors within. By the fourth week, prisoners internalize the futility of flight. Their energy is conserved, their actions measured, and their minds occupied with survival rather than illusions of freedom. The dungeon has trained them through hardship, fear, and failure to recognize that escape is a rare, nearly impossible feat. Even when external conditions seem favorable, the combination of environmental, psychological, and social constraints ensures that flight is a near impossibility. The ultimate lesson of the dungeon's design is clear. Escape is rarely a matter of courage, ingenuity, or strength alone. It is a rare alignment of conditions, timing, and luck, often denied to all but the most fortunate or desperate. For the vast majority, survival depends not on fleeing, but on endurance, adaptation, and careful management of body, mind, and resources. In the end, the dungeon enforces its control through the perception of futility. Even thoughts of escape are measured, calculated, and discouraged by the environment itself. Prisoners may plan, hope, and imagine freedom, but the walls, guards, traps, and obstacles ensure that the reality remains unchanged. The dungeon does not merely confine the body, it confines the mind, teaching through design that endurance, patience, and vigilance are the only viable strategies for survival. Those who live to tell the tale do so because they accept the limitations imposed upon them. The lesson is universal. In a medieval dungeon, the fantasy of escape is far more common than its reality, and the cost of attempting it is often higher than the cost of enduring. In a medieval dungeon, chains are not merely tools of punishment. They are instruments of control, designed to dominate body, mind, and spirit simultaneously. Unlike the cold or hunger, which punish gradually, chains enforce obedience immediately, limiting movement and reinforcing a constant awareness of vulnerability. They shape behavior, instill fear, and gradually erode both physical strength and mental resilience. The most obvious impact of chains is physical restriction. Iron cuffs, ankle shackles, and wrist bindings limit mobility, forcing prisoners into unnatural postures. Simple movements become difficult. Standing, sitting, or lying down require constant adjustment. Every step is measured, every turn calculated, and every motion a reminder of the prison's authority. The body is trapped in a constant negotiation with the cold, unyielding metal that binds it. Chains are heavy, and their weight contributes to fatigue. Even if a prisoner is otherwise healthy, carrying iron links day after day exacts a relentless toll. Muscles strain, joints ache, and circulation diminishes. Blisters, sores, and abrasions form where metal rubs against skin, and without proper treatment, infections can develop. What begins as discomfort can quickly escalate into a debilitating injury, leaving prisoners vulnerable to disease and exhaustion. The arrangement of chains varies depending on the dungeon's design and the perceived threat of the prisoner. Some are bound to walls or floors, effectively immobilizing them for long periods. Others may have limited mobility, allowing movement within a cell but preventing escape or coordination with other prisoners. Even minor changes in posture require effort, attention, and strategy, turning basic bodily functions into a daily challenge. Chains also serve as a constant psychological reminder of powerlessness. The feeling of metal against skin, the sound of clanking links, and the knowledge that every movement is restricted reinforce the prisoner's subjugation. Over time, this omnipresent constraint erodes confidence and self-esteem. A prisoner may find themselves hesitating, second-guessing actions, and internalizing a sense of helplessness. Even when unobserved, the chains assert dominance through their presence alone. Restraints limit more than movement. They influence interaction. Socialization with other prisoners is restricted, as gestures, positioning, and proximity are controlled by chains. Physical support, sharing of resources, or simple expressions of camaraderie become complicated or impossible. Prisoners are forced to navigate relationships within constraints that amplify isolation and tension. Missteps can result in physical punishment or damage to the limited trust that exists among captives. The mental impact of chains is as significant as the physical. Immobilization increases stress, heightens awareness of danger, and exacerbates existing fears. Prisoners quickly learn that chains amplify vulnerability. If a guard approaches, there is little they can do to defend themselves. If disease or injury strikes, movement to tend to the problem is restricted. Chains impose dependency and enforce constant caution, creating a state of perpetual alertness. Over time, chains shape behavior. Prisoners learn to anticipate limitations, ration energy, and adapt their movements. They develop strategies for sleeping, eating, and attending to hygiene, all while bound. Creativity becomes essential. Rolling onto one side without aggravating abrasions, positioning to avoid swelling in limbs, and conserving energy for necessary actions are daily exercises in ingenuity. The chains demand constant attention, leaving little room for distraction or relaxation. Physical deterioration is inevitable. Long-term restraint leads to muscular atrophy, joint stiffness, and circulation problems. Skin lesions, nerve compression, and swelling become chronic issues. Simple recovery, such as stretching or moving freely, is impossible. The human body, designed for mobility, suffers under prolonged restriction, demonstrating that imprisonment in chains is not merely uncomfortable, it is actively harmful. Hygiene becomes a nearly impossible task. Chains limit access to necessary areas of the body, making washing or attending to wounds difficult. The accumulation of sweat, grime, and biological waste contributes to infections, infestations, and odor. Even the most cautious prisoners are unable to maintain cleanliness, further weakening the body and inviting disease. Chains, in effect, amplify the environmental hazards of the dungeon. The clinking of chains becomes both a sound and a symbol. Every movement echoes through stone corridors, announcing presence, compliance, or weakness. Noise cannot be easily controlled, making stealth nearly impossible. Prisoners learn that even subtle movements may draw attention from guards, reinforcing the psychological pressure of surveillance. The chains are never silent. They speak constantly of captivity and control. Sleep is disrupted. Lying bound on stone floors or in confined spaces creates discomfort that prevents deep rest. Muscles cramp, circulation slows, and pain persists through the night. Dreams may be interrupted by the awareness of restriction, reinforcing anxiety and exhaustion. Chains, cold, and discomfort merge into a continuous cycle, eroding resilience and sharpening despair. Chains also magnify the effects of other dungeon hardships. Hunger, thirst, and disease are compounded by physical restriction. A weak body struggles to adjust to immobility, making it harder to reach for food or water, tend to injuries, or escape vermin. Mental strain increases because the prisoner is aware of both personal limitations and the constant threats of environment and guards. Chains are not just punishment, they are a multiplier of every other hardship. Interaction with guards is similarly constrained. Punishment, movement to other areas, or participation in forced labor requires compliance and precision. Chains make even basic obedience a physical challenge, ensuring that the prisoner is continuously reminded of the pendency. Missteps are immediately apparent, and even minor errors can provoke harsh retribution. Chains enforce submission through both restriction and observation. Long-term restraint alters psychological perception of the body. Prisoners become hyper-aware of sensations, listening to every scrape, clink, or twinge of pain. Movement becomes deliberate and calculated. Even after release, individuals often retain a heightened sensitivity, a lasting imprint of the chain's control over body and mind. The dungeon teaches that restraint is not merely a physical imposition. It is a reshaping of thought, perception, and self-awareness. Chains also restrict access to social or emotional support. Touch, comfort, and collaboration with fellow prisoners are limited, intensifying isolation. Human contact, even brief or minimal, is controlled and monitored, reducing opportunities for morale, reassurance, or mutual aid. Prisoners must endure emotional as well as physical confinement, as chains enforce solitude as effectively as walls. The dungeon encourages subtle adaptations. Prisoners learn to shift weight, rest in intervals, and adjust positioning to minimize injury. Creativity becomes critical. Rolling onto a side without aggravating sores, maneuvering to prevent swelling, or improvising comfort with rags or scraps. Every day is a negotiation between necessity, comfort, and survival, with chains defining the parameters of possibility. Mental resilience develops alongside physical adaptation. Prisoners focus on small victories, enduring a night without injury, adjusting posture without pain, or completing a basic task while bound. Chains become both enemy and teacher, shaping thought processes, attention, and patience. Survival depends on observing limitations, learning from small successes, and maintaining hope within constraints. Even brief periods of freedom, such as movement between cells, are accompanied by caution. The chains dictate pace, posture, and range, ensuring that prisoners remain aware of both their vulnerability and the ever-present presence of authority. Mobility is a calculated exercise. Freedom is relative, measured in inches rather than steps. The dungeon's lessons are reinforced daily, a constant reminder that restraint is a tool of both compliance and control. By the third or fourth week, prisoners are acutely aware of their limitations. Chains have taught endurance, observation, and strategic patience. The body has adapted to restriction, the mind to constant vigilance. But the toll is evident: fatigue, pain, sores, and weakened muscles. Even minor injury can spiral into life-threatening issues when freedom of movement is limited. Chains are more than tools. They are an embodiment of the dungeon's philosophy. They enforce obedience, magnify vulnerability, and intensify every other hardship. They shape behavior, dictate interaction, and reshape both body and mind. Physical endurance alone is insufficient. Adaptation, observation, and mental fortitude are equally critical. In the medieval dungeon, chains are not merely punishment. They are a comprehensive system of control. They teach that survival depends on mastery of limitation, patience under discomfort, and acceptance of a reality in which mobility is restricted, danger is constant, and hope must be measured. The lesson is undeniable. In a dungeon, chains are never neutral. They are active participants in captivity, shaping the prisoner as surely as walls, cold, hunger, or disease. To endure them is to endure the full force of the dungeon itself, a relentless, unyielding test of both body and mind. In the medieval dungeon, survival is not only a matter of enduring the physical hardships of chains, cold, hunger, and disease. It is equally about navigating the relentless scrutiny of the guards. Their presence is constant, their authority unquestioned, and their observation a powerful tool of psychological control. Even when not actively punishing, guards shape behavior, manipulate fear, and maintain order with a subtle but pervasive pressure that can break the strongest of wills. From the moment a prisoner enters, the guard's eye asserts dominance. Every movement is noted: a twitch of a finger, a shuffle of feet, or a glance toward an area of weakness. Guards are trained to detect anomalies, to anticipate attempts at disobedience or escape. Their experience within the dungeon allows them to read behavior with near-perfect accuracy, turning even mundane actions into moments of potential consequence. Observation is continuous. Guards patrol corridors, stand at strategic points, and monitor prisoners both inside and outside their cells. Even when resting, their presence is implied, whether through shadowed windows, distant footsteps, or the occasional call of a warning. Prisoners internalize this gaze, adapting movements, timing actions, and calculating behavior to avoid drawing attention. The psychological impact is immediate and enduring. The feeling of being watched never truly fades, even when guards are out of sight. Punishment is a calculated extension of observation. Minor infractions, such as speaking out of turn, failing to comply quickly, or attempting to hide rations, may be met with swift and severe retribution. This could include physical pain, extended restraint, or removal from the relative safety of the cell to a more hostile environment. Punishment reinforces obedience, ensuring that every prisoner understands the consequences of misjudgment or disobedience. The knowledge of potential punishment is as powerful as punishment itself. The dungeon operates as both a physical and psychological system. Guards are enforcers, yes, but they are also instruments of terror. Their gaze cultivates anxiety, paranoia, and hypervigilance. Prisoners quickly learn to anticipate scrutiny, often adjusting movements preemptively. Simple actions, eating, moving, or interacting with other prisoners become exercises in timing and discretion. The awareness that one is constantly observed intensifies every hardship of the dungeon, from hunger to chains to illness. Strategic placement of guards maximizes control. They position themselves to observe multiple cells simultaneously, patrol in unpredictable patterns, and rotate shifts to prevent familiarity from creating openings. This ensures that prisoners cannot predict when or where observation will occur, keeping anxiety levels high. Even prisoners who appear compliant are scrutinized, as guards understand that desperation and cleverness can inspire subtle attempts at subversion. Guards often employ intimidation tactics beyond direct observation. Loud voices, deliberate pacing, and sudden appearances cultivate fear. Shadows are manipulated to create the illusion of omnipresence. Prisoners quickly learn that their perception of freedom is limited not only by walls and chains, but also by the psychological influence of the guard's eye. Every glance, gesture, or sound reinforces the notion that resistance is futile and compliance is the safest option. Punishment is rarely arbitrary. Guards understand the cumulative effects of mental strain, hunger, and fatigue. They time interventions to maximize impact, using small infractions to remind prisoners of authority. Even minor discipline, a harsh word, a shift in positioning, or a brief exposure to cold, compounds the physical and psychological stress already imposed by the dungeon environment. Prisoners learn that survival is as much about reading the guard's intentions as enduring physical hardship. The dynamic between guards and prisoners is a complex balance of fear, power, and negotiation. While overt rebellion is rare, prisoners may attempt subtle resistance, hiding scraps of food, adjusting posture secretly, or communicating through discreet signals. Guards, aware of such possibilities, heighten vigilance and enforce rules with precision. These small interactions create a constant mental chess game, in which prisoners must anticipate, calculate, and respond while conserving energy and avoiding attention. Sleep, too, is disrupted by the psychological presence of guards. The faintest sound, a footstep, a door creak, or a distant murmur, is enough to wake a prisoner in a panic. Even moments of rest are shadowed by the awareness that observation continues, that punishment may follow any perceived lapse. The body may be chained and immobilized, but the mind is never truly at ease. Fatigue, anxiety, and fear compound, leaving prisoners more vulnerable to illness, injury, and despair. Guards also control access to essential resources, further reinforcing dependency. Rations, water, and warmth are distributed according to strict schedules, often with minimal discretion. This controlled scarcity ensures that prisoners cannot fully prioritize survival or comfort independently. Every interaction with a guard carries risk. Questioning authority, requesting additional resources, or attempting subtle negotiation may trigger punishment. In this way, the guard's role is both logistical and psychological, maintaining survival as a calculated, regulated process. Observation is coupled with surveillance of prisoner interactions. Guards monitor for alliances, covert communication, or the sharing of resources. Even seemingly minor acts of cooperation are noted, and favoritism or trust between prisoners is often disrupted. The dungeon environment, combined with vigilant guards, ensures that unity among captives is fragile, reinforcing isolation and individual vulnerability. Fear of punishment becomes an internalized control mechanism. Prisoners regulate their own behavior preemptively, curbing impulses, restraining gestures, and measuring speech. The dungeon teaches that the mind is as constrained as the body. Chains and walls are complemented by mental vigilance, self-surveillance, and the anticipation of consequences. Compliance becomes both a survival strategy and a cognitive exercise, a constant negotiation between instinct and instruction. Guards also serve as psychological manipulators through selective enforcement. Observing a minor misstep and responding dramatically reinforces attention and compliance without expending excessive energy. These calculated demonstrations ensure that all prisoners internalize the threat, even those not directly punished. Fear spreads efficiently, and obedience is enforced communally. The dungeon becomes self-regulating through observation, intimidation, and selective intervention. Long-term imprisonment amplifies these effects. Weeks or months in a dungeon conditions prisoners to live under constant scrutiny. Habits, routines, and even thoughts are shaped by the anticipated presence of guards. Every action becomes a measured response, every decision influenced by the perceived judgment of authority. This psychological conditioning is enduring. Even after release, prisoners may retain hypervigilance, difficulty trusting others, and heightened anxiety, evidence of the profound impact of observation. The cumulative effect of guard oversight, chains, disease, hunger, and environmental hardship is relentless. Prisoners are trained, often involuntarily, in submission and adaptation. Physical endurance is necessary, but mental resilience and psychological acuity are equally critical. Every moment is a test. A cough may attract attention. A stumble may provoke punishment. A glance may be interpreted as defiance. Survival requires constant awareness, flexibility, and careful management of both body and mind. Even when guards are absent from direct view, their presence is felt. Knowledge of schedules, awareness of patrol patterns, and understanding of punishment protocols create a pervasive sense of vigilance. Prisoners develop mental maps of observation, predicting risk and adjusting behavior accordingly. These cognitive strategies, while essential, impose additional mental strain as the mind remains engaged continuously in calculating survival probabilities. The dungeon's psychological control extends beyond fear. Guards model hierarchy, reinforce social isolation, and dictate access to critical resources. Prisoners internalize rules and anticipate consequences, often enforcing self-discipline more rigorously than external punishment would require. The dungeon thus creates an environment in which the mind participates actively in its own subjugation, learning patterns of restraint, compliance, and survival under constant surveillance. By the end of weeks or months, prisoners are profoundly shaped by these dynamics. The guard's eyes, combined with chains, disease, hunger, and cold, have transformed daily existence into a delicate balance of endurance, observation, and strategic adaptation. Even minor lapses can carry severe consequences, ensuring that survival is not merely a matter of physical strength, but of careful psychological negotiation. Ultimately, the lesson is stark and unavoidable. In a medieval dungeon, the human mind is as confined as the body. Observation, intimidation, and psychological control are as effective as chains or walls, if not more so. Survival demands vigilance, adaptability, and patience. Every glance, step, and action is measured against both the visible and invisible presence of authority. In the dungeon, freedom is not only restricted, the mind itself is constantly monitored, manipulated, and constrained. The guard's eye is omnipresent, the punishment omnipotent, and the lessons indelible. Those who survive do so not because they are strong or lucky alone, but because they have learned to navigate a world where every movement is observed, every choice scrutinized, and every misstep potentially fatal. In the medieval dungeon, survival is a test of body, mind, and spirit under the unyielding gaze of authority. Time in a medieval dungeon is unlike any other passage of hours or days in the outside world. Outside, time is punctuated by movement, purpose, and interaction. Within the dungeon, it stretches, thickens, and becomes a tangible force pressing down on the prisoner. The body is constrained, the senses limited, and every day seems to mirror the last. The monotony is itself a tool of torture, eroding mental resilience and quietly breaking the spirit without the need for overt violence. From the very first hour, the weight of time is apparent. A prisoner counts the hours by the flicker of a torch or the footsteps of guards. Days blend together as the light outside never reaches the stone walls, leaving an eternal twilight or oppressive darkness. Without clocks or calendars, prisoners lose track of progression. The mind struggles to anchor itself to reality when every day feels like the same one, repeated endlessly. Boredom is far from harmless. It amplifies anxiety, frustration, and despair. In the absence of action, the mind turns inward, focusing on discomfort, hunger, pain, and fear. Thoughts spiral, memories of freedom or family become bittersweet, and the imagination, normally a source of comfort, transforms into a source of torment. Prisoners imagine every possible horror, endless confinement, imminent punishment, or the futility of escape. In the dungeon, time is not merely counted, it is weaponized. Even small tasks, once a distraction, can become obsessive. Prisoners might trace cracks in the walls, rearrange meager possessions, or pace the limited confines of their cell. These repetitive behaviors offer temporary relief, but reinforce the cyclical nature of existence in captivity. Movement becomes ritualized, thought becomes fixated, and the mind grows weary from the very act of surviving without purpose. Monotony interacts with isolation to magnify psychological strain. Conversation is limited, social interaction is carefully monitored, and contact with the outside world is nearly non-existent. Prisoners may be aware of others in nearby cells, but the opportunity for meaningful exchange is restricted. Every day becomes an echo of the last. The same walls, the same smells, the same chains. The human need for novelty, interaction, and engagement is systematically denied, leaving the mind vulnerable to depression, apathy, and despair. Time also distorts perception. Prisoners lose the ability to accurately estimate the passage of hours, often believing minutes to be hours and weeks to be days. Sleep cycles are disrupted by discomfort, hunger, or anxiety, further disorienting the mind. The prisoner exists in a state where reality is malleable, memory unreliable, and the external world almost irrelevant. In this state, even minor shocks, the sudden footsteps of a guard, the clang of chains, feel magnified, heightening stress and fear. Monotony is also reinforced by routine, or the lack thereof. Guards may appear at irregular intervals, meals may be inconsistent, and punishment is unpredictable. Prisoners cannot rely on external cues to structure time. Instead, they exist in a constant state of anticipation and vigilance. Every moment is measured against both potential danger and the endless, unmoving walls of the cell. This unpredictability transforms boredom into a form of psychological pressure, in which the prisoner's mind is as tightly controlled as the body. The slow erosion of will is subtle but relentless. Days without change or purpose force the mind into a state of hyper-awareness of suffering. Hunger is felt more acutely, discomfort more sharply, and chains more oppressive. Mental resilience falters under the constant repetition of identical, oppressive stimuli. Prisoners begin to question their strength, their endurance, and even their desire to survive. Time itself becomes an adversary, each tick a reminder of captivity and the impossibility of escape. Dungeons often employ deliberate monotony to weaken resistance. Guards may arrange cells, schedules, or punishments to maximize psychological impact. Predictable discomfort is as effective as sudden pain, and the combination of the two is devastating. Prisoners come to understand that every moment of enforced stillness, every repetition of minor tasks, and every hour spent waiting is an intentional tool of control. The dungeon is patient. It works slowly, systematically, and effectively, knowing that endurance alone will eventually break even the strongest resolve. Even distractions are limited. Books, games, or conversation are rare. The environment itself offers little for the senses. No sunlight, few objects, and minimal sound. The mind, starved of stimulation, begins to ruminate endlessly. Prisoners replay events, anticipate danger, or construct elaborate escape plans, only to confront the impossibility of execution. Every imagined solution highlights the futility of their situation, reinforcing the sense of helplessness and the oppressive weight of unchanging time. Sleep offers little relief. Narrow, hard stone floors, chains, and irregular guard patrols disrupt rest. The body may nod into brief slumber, but the mind remains alert, aware of danger or discomfort. Dreams are fragmented, restless, and often dominated by fear. Even waking moments are colored by fatigue, foggy cognition, and heightened anxiety. The dungeon transforms the natural rhythm of life into a relentless trial, using both wakefulness and sleep as tools of endurance testing. Monotony also fosters internal tension among prisoners. Limited interaction means that even minor disagreements or misunderstandings can become amplified. Opportunities for diversion or amusement are scarce, so frustrations manifest intensely. Loneliness, coupled with the unchanging environment, turns every minor irritation into a major mental strain. Social dynamics, when they exist, are fragile and often manipulated by guards to prevent solidarity or rebellion. Boredom and monotony also heighten fear. The lack of external information means that every sound, shadow, or minor disturbance is exaggerated. The prisoner imagines worst-case scenarios, anticipates punishment, and rehearses failure in their mind. Time stretches endlessly, each moment becoming a microcosm of potential danger. Psychological fatigue sets in long before physical endurance fails, ensuring that captivity is as much a battle of the mind as the body. Prisoners often attempt to impose order or routine on their lives to combat monotony. Counting, pacing, or performing small, repetitive tasks offer a sense of control. Yet, even these strategies are limited, constrained by chains, cold, and hunger. Efforts to create structure are a double-edged sword. They provide temporary relief, but also reinforce awareness of the dungeon's confines. The contrast between the mind's attempts at freedom and the body's restriction deepens psychological tension. The cumulative effect is insidious. Weeks or months pass in a blur, marked not by meaningful events, but by the repetition of discomfort, fear, and isolation. The mind grows increasingly fixated on suffering, the passage of time, and the improbability of escape. Motivation erodes, energy declines, and mental resilience weakens. Prisoners are caught in a slow, relentless cycle in which survival becomes both the primary goal and a constant struggle against monotony. Even the strongest prisoners adapt by narrowing focus. Thoughts are compartmentalized, distractions minimized, and energy conserved. Yet, the dungeon's design ensures that even these coping mechanisms are limited in effectiveness. Every day is a test of endurance, patience, and mental flexibility. The prisoner becomes attuned to the rhythms of the dungeon, learning to navigate the weight of time as carefully as the chains or guards. Ultimately, the dungeon teaches that time is a weapon. Its passage can inflict suffering as severe as any physical tool. Boredom, monotony, and the slow erosion of will work in tandem with chains, hunger, disease, and surveillance to create an environment in which survival is never guaranteed. Mental endurance becomes as critical as physical strength, and every day survived is a small victory against an institution designed to strip away both body and spirit. The slow torture of time ensures that prisoners are not merely confined, they are reshaped, their sense of purpose and agency gradually worn away. Patience, observation, and strategic mental engagement become essential tools for survival. Those who endure learn to navigate the psychological landscape of the dungeon with as much care as the physical one, understanding that captivity is as much a matter of the mind as the body. In a medieval dungeon, the passage of time is not neutral. It is deliberate, calculated, and designed to erode resilience. Every hour survived is a testament to the prisoner's ability to withstand both the tangible and intangible forces of confinement. And when the days blur into weeks, the weeks into months, the dungeon proves that its most potent weapon may not be the chains, the cold, or the hunger, but the relentless, crushing monotony of time itself. If chains and cold were the visible punishments of a medieval dungeon, disease, rot, and decay were its hidden executioners. These invisible forces operated silently, slowly wearing down prisoners' bodies and minds, often long before guards, chains, or torture could claim their toll. The dungeon's environment, combined with overcrowding, poor sanitation, and limited medical knowledge, created the perfect breeding ground for infection, illness, and fatal deterioration. From the moment a prisoner was confined, exposure to filth and pathogens was inevitable. Stone floors, damp walls, and unventilated spaces encouraged mold, mildew, and bacterial growth. Water seeped through cracks, pooling in corners, and providing a breeding ground for parasites. Air circulation was minimal, meaning that odors, bacteria, and airborne diseases accumulated, creating a pervasive and persistent threat. Every breath was laced with risk. Every step through the cell a potential encounter with infection. Overcrowding intensified the problem. Dungeons were rarely designed with comfort or health in mind. They were designed for control, confinement, and punishment. Multiple prisoners crammed into a single cell increased the spread of disease. Skin infections, lice, fleas, and other vermin became common. Shared facilities, if they existed at all, were breeding grounds for gastrointestinal infections. Illness could spread rapidly, and even minor conditions, a scratch, a cut, or a scrape, could become life-threatening when compounded by poor hygiene and limited care. Water and food scarcity added another layer of vulnerability. Contaminated water and meager rations weakened the body's natural defenses, making prisoners more susceptible to infection. Spoiled food, often unavoidable in medieval storage conditions, contributed to gastrointestinal distress and malnutrition. Weak, hungry bodies were incapable of fighting even minor ailments, turning minor illnesses into deadly threats. Rot and decay were not limited to organic matter. The dungeon's physical structure contributed to disease. Damp stone walls and floors encouraged mold and mildew, which could irritate lungs and exacerbate respiratory conditions. Wooden fixtures, when rotting, emitted spores and bacteria. Even the chains that bound prisoners were often rusted, contributing to infections when they scraped or pierced skin. The environment itself became an adversary, actively undermining health and well-being. Prisoners had limited access to medical care. Knowledge of hygiene, infection, and treatment was rudimentary at best. Wounds, abrasions, and sores, common in chains and confined spaces, were rarely treated effectively. Infections spread unchecked, often becoming gangrenous or systemic. Even minor scratches could lead to sepsis or death. The dungeon ensured that physical harm was compounded by an inability to heal, turning small injuries into major threats. Airborne diseases were equally insidious. Poor ventilation trapped the exhalations, coughs, and sneezes of prisoners, facilitating the spread of respiratory infections. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other lung conditions thrived in such environments. Prisoners often suffered from persistent coughing, fever, and fatigue, their weakened bodies struggling to cope. Even when disease was not immediately fatal, it compounded other hardships, sapping energy, reducing mobility, and exacerbating the psychological strain of confinement. Vermin played a major role in spreading disease. Rats, mice, and insects thrived in the darkness, feeding on scraps and waste. They carried fleas, bacteria, and parasites, often biting prisoners or contaminating rations. Contact with vermin was unavoidable, making the dungeon an environment where illness was an inevitable companion. Sleep was interrupted by scratching, gnawing, and the sensation of tiny creatures crawling across skin. This persistent, low-level harassment kept prisoners in a heightened state of anxiety while simultaneously spreading infection. Sanitation was virtually non-existent. Waste disposal was limited or poorly managed, leading to the accumulation of feces and urine. Ammonia and other chemical byproducts saturated the air, irritating eyes, lungs, and skin. Disease vectors multiplied in these conditions, turning a prisoner's cell into a microcosm of infectious hazards. The human body, already weakened by chains, cold, and hunger, became highly susceptible to intestinal parasites, cholera, dysentery, and other deadly illnesses. Malnutrition further amplified vulnerability. Prisoners rarely received adequate calories, protein, or vitamins. Food, when provided, was often spoiled or nutritionally deficient. Weak bones, brittle skin, anemia, and compromised immunity became widespread. Even a small infection could spiral into a life-threatening condition because the body lacked the resources to fight back. Prisoners were simultaneously starving and diseased, their bodies deteriorating faster than they could adapt. The mental toll of disease was profound. Persistent illness exacerbated feelings of helplessness, despair, and fear. Fever, pain, and fatigue impaired cognitive function, reducing the ability to strategize, adapt, or resist. Sleep disruption and chronic discomfort eroded morale, making even minor challenges feel insurmountable. Prisoners often succumbed psychologically before physically, their resolve crumbling under the relentless weight of disease and decay. Some illnesses were long-term killers. Tuberculosis could linger for months, weakening the lungs and body gradually. Chronic infections, untreated wounds, and parasitic infestations produced a slow decline that compounded the effects of hunger, chains, and monotony. Death was not always immediate. It was often a drawn-out process, a slow surrender to the dungeon's unseen hazards. Prisoners occasionally attempted rudimentary hygiene practices. Limited water might allow washing, and attempts to clean sores or bandage injuries could offer temporary relief. Yet these efforts were hampered by chains, overcrowding, and the scarcity of supplies. Even the most diligent prisoner could not overcome the pervasive environmental hazards. Every effort to maintain cleanliness was a minor victory in a war they were unlikely to win. Disease also intensified social tension among prisoners. When resources were scarce, illness could provoke fear, competition, or isolation. Sick prisoners might be shunned or avoided, while others attempted to minimize exposure. The social dynamics of survival were complicated by the invisible threat of illness, creating both psychological and physical challenges. The dungeon's architecture contributed to the spread of disease. Poor drainage meant that rainwater, waste, and effluent pooled in corners. Damp conditions encouraged mold growth and insect proliferation. Cracks in walls allowed vermin to enter cells easily, and the stone floors were cold, perpetually damp, and conducive to fungal infections. Every element of the environment worked in concert to undermine health, ensuring that survival required constant vigilance and adaptation. Air quality was another silent killer. Stale, damp air encouraged respiratory conditions, while the accumulation of noxious gases from human waste and decay produced headaches, nausea, and fatigue. Prisoners were often unable to breathe freely, further weakening physical strength and increasing susceptibility to infection. Breathing itself became an act of caution and awareness, as every inhalation carried risk. Even simple injuries were dangerous. A scraped knee from a misstep in chains, a cut from rusty iron, or a bruise from being shoved could quickly become infected. Without proper treatment, these injuries worsened, causing fever, swelling, and systemic infection. The dungeon ensured that the smallest mistakes could have life-threatening consequences, making every movement a calculated risk. Over time, the combination of disease, rot, decay, and malnutrition produced a profound deterioration. Prisoners weakened, became lethargic, and lost resilience. The body and mind deteriorated in tandem, creating a downward spiral that was almost impossible to escape. Each day of confinement brought new hazards, compounding the effects of previous days, until survival became an extraordinary challenge. Ultimately, disease and decay are reminders that the dungeon's deadliest weapons were not always visible. Chains, guards, and walls inflicted suffering, but it was the invisible enemies, bacteria, parasites, mold, and malnutrition that often determined life or death. Survival demanded awareness, adaptation, and endurance. Yet even the strongest, most vigilant prisoner was vulnerable to these unseen forces. In the medieval dungeon, the environment itself was a killer. The air, water, walls, and even chains carried hazards. Every day required vigilance, careful rationing, and a constant assessment of risk. Illness was not an anomaly, it was a certainty. Disease, rot, and decay transformed confinement into a multi-dimensional struggle, testing body, mind, and spirit simultaneously. Those who survived this chapter of the dungeon's ordeal were not simply lucky. They were adaptive, resilient, and acutely aware of the invisible forces around them. They understood that survival required more than physical endurance. It required strategy, observation, and a constant negotiation with the environment itself. The dungeon was patient, methodical, and thorough, and its silent killers ensured that only the most resilient could endure the full measure of its punishment. In the medieval dungeon, hope often takes the shape of escape. For prisoners, the mind reaches for freedom as naturally as the body struggles against chains. Yet escape is rarely a matter of cleverness or courage. It is a test of opportunity, timing, physical endurance, and sheer luck. The dungeon is designed to make escape nearly impossible, and those who attempt it quickly learn that every plan faces relentless obstacles: walls, guards, traps, environmental hazards, and the limitations of their own weakened bodies. From the very beginning, prisoners are aware of the odds. The architecture of the dungeon, narrow corridors, heavy doors, small windows, and complex layouts, is intentionally designed to thwart freedom. Stone walls are thick, often extending deep underground, making any attempt to dig, break, or climb nearly impossible. Iron bars and locked gates provide further physical barriers, while patrols and observation ensure that any movement is noticed immediately. The physical structure itself enforces confinement as effectively as chains. Planning an escape requires both opportunity and observation. Prisoners must study guard patterns, cell layouts, and daily routines. Every step, every pause, and every sound is calculated, as even a minor mistake can trigger detection. The prisoners who attempt escape are keenly aware that failure carries consequences far worse than continued confinement: punishment, extended isolation, or even death. The stakes are absolute, and the mental strain of planning weighs heavily on the mind. Yet, despite these barriers, prisoners attempt escape, driven by desperation. Some seek to exploit guards' predictable patrols, others attempt to squeeze through tiny gaps, and a few attempt daring feats of ingenuity, fashioning tools from scraps, loosening stones, or communicating secretly with fellow captives. These attempts require patience, precision, and nerves of steel, all in an environment that systematically erodes endurance and focus. The environment itself is a formidable obstacle. Darkness conceals hazards, limits perception, and disorients those who try to move stealthily. Narrow passageways restrict mobility, making even minor miscalculations potentially fatal. The stone floors are uneven and slippery, and air circulation is poor, leaving prisoners breathless and fatigued after even short bursts of activity. The physical demands of escape are immense, and the prisoner's body, already weakened by chains, hunger, and disease, is rarely up to the task. Every attempt at stealth is monitored. Guards are trained to detect subtle changes, shadows, misplaced objects, or unexpected sounds. Their vigilance is relentless, and any suspicious activity is quickly addressed. The prisoner learns that even a whisper, a stumble, or a misplaced object can bring immediate and severe consequences. The dungeon cultivates hyper-awareness, making every step in an escape plan an exercise in precision and risk assessment. Failure is almost guaranteed. Even minor errors, misjudging the timing of a guard's patrol, underestimating a physical barrier, or exhausting oneself prematurely, can lead to immediate recapture. Consequences are severe: extended chains, starvation, additional punishment, or solitary confinement. These consequences are not merely disciplinary. They reinforce the futility of escape and serve as a cautionary example for other prisoners. The mental toll of repeated failure is profound, reinforcing despair, hopelessness, and submission. Prisoners who attempt escape also contend with environmental hazards beyond walls and guards. Damp conditions, darkness, and vermin complicate every movement. Uneven floors, debris, and confined spaces make slips and injuries common. Even a minor injury can prove catastrophic, as untreated wounds, infection, and exhaustion quickly overwhelm the body. The environment itself works as an accomplice to the guards, ensuring that escape is as dangerous as it is unlikely. The psychological component of escape is equally significant. Prisoners must maintain focus, suppress panic, and resist the urge to give up when progress is slow or obstacles appear insurmountable. The dungeon is designed to exploit fear and fatigue, breaking resolve before physical boundaries are even reached. The mind becomes the battlefield. The prisoner must contend with anxiety, self-doubt, and despair, all while executing a plan that leaves no margin for error. Even successful steps are fleeting victories. A prisoner may navigate a narrow passage or avoid detection temporarily, only to confront another obstacle moments later. Each small success highlights the scale of the challenge, reinforcing the improbability of ultimate freedom. The dungeon ensures that the journey toward escape is as punishing as the confinement itself, using hope and incremental progress to intensify frustration and fear. Escape attempts are often observed and manipulated by guards. Minor successes or signs of ingenuity may be monitored to identify weaknesses in the prisoner's behavior, routines, or resolve. Guards may subtly adjust patrols or cell arrangements to exploit anticipated movements, ensuring that prisoners cannot act freely. Every interaction, observation, and adjustment reinforces the dungeon's control, making escape a test of both physical skill and mental acuity under extreme surveillance. Failures are instructive for the dungeon itself. Each attempt provides information that guards use to tighten security, rearrange schedules, or increase vigilance. The prisoner's ingenuity is co-opted, turning effort into reinforcement of control. The dungeon adapts, becoming increasingly impenetrable with each attempt. Over time, prisoners learn that ingenuity alone cannot overcome structural, environmental, and human constraints. Survival requires more than cleverness. It demands adaptation, patience, and psychological endurance. The cumulative effect of repeated failed escape attempts is devastating. Physical exhaustion compounds the effects of malnutrition, disease, and injury. Mental strain intensifies as hope diminishes and despair grows. Prisoners may experience despair, anxiety, or even resignation, understanding that freedom is not merely distant, but practically impossible. Yet the desire to escape, even when tempered by reality, remains a powerful force, shaping daily decisions and interactions. Escape is not merely physical, it is symbolic. It represents freedom, agency, and the possibility of life beyond the dungeon. Its impossibility, therefore, is a profound psychological weapon. Guards in the environment conspire to make hope a double-edged sword, motivating prisoners while simultaneously exposing them to risk, failure, and punishment. The prisoner's mind is trapped in a paradox, needing hope to endure, yet punished by its pursuit. Even planning without action can be psychologically taxing. Prisoners constantly anticipate opportunities, rehearse movements, and calculate risks, all while confined to minimal space. The mental effort of strategizing, coupled with fatigue, disease, and hunger, is exhausting. Sleep, focus, and morale are all affected, leaving the prisoner weaker for the day's challenges. The dungeon uses the mind as effectively as it uses chains, teaching that every thought has consequences. Some prisoners attempt collaboration, sharing information, coordinating distractions, or exchanging tips can offer small advantages. Yet these alliances are fragile, constrained by surveillance, scarcity of resources, and distrust. Guards often manipulate prisoner interactions to prevent solidarity, ensuring that cooperation is risky and limited. Escape, even in small, coordinated efforts, remains a perilous endeavor. The punishment for failure reinforces the system. Prisoners who are caught attempting escape are often subjected to harsher chains, solitary confinement, or additional deprivation. Public examples of punishment reinforce obedience and deter others. The dungeon's psychological grip is strengthened as hope and risk are intertwined with pain and consequence. Prisoners are constantly reminded that freedom is not just difficult, it is systematically denied. Ultimately, the dungeon ensures that survival requires acceptance of limitation. Escape is a test of imagination, courage, and endurance, yet its impossibility teaches submission, patience, and careful navigation of the environment. The prisoner must balance hope with realism, ingenuity with caution, and action with endurance. Every plan that fails is a lesson in both the dungeon's design and the prisoner's vulnerability. In the medieval dungeon, escape is an idea as potent as it is unattainable. Planning, attempting, and failing are exercises in courage, calculation, and endurance. But the system ensures that failure is the expected outcome. The walls, guards, environment, and psychological pressures operate in unison to make freedom nearly impossible. Survival is not about triumphing over obstacles. It is about navigating impossibility with awareness, patience, and resilience. By the end, prisoners come to understand that the dungeon's ultimate control is not merely physical confinement, but the management of hope, expectation, and action. Escape, the ultimate symbol of agency, is rendered almost completely unattainable. Survival demands adaptation, observation, and careful acceptance of limits. The dungeon ensures that the desire to escape is a test, a torment, and a measure of endurance, leaving the prisoner forever aware of the thin line between aspiration and impossibility.